Hey guys, tonight I've got 10 special scary stories just for you. Stories that don't just live in the dark, they feed on it. This is the place where sleep turns into shadows and the whispers, they're not just in your head. So turn off your room light, lock your door, and don't look behind you. Let the darkness in, and before we begin, get comfortable. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my stories. And hey, drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. What time is it for you right now? It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now let's begin. It was the first night of the trip when I realized the highway sounded different after midnight, like the road was breathing under me instead of buzzing. My phone said 1:57 a.m. when the service bars dropped to 1, then none, and the GPS map turned into a blank beige screen with a little blue dot crawling west on I-40. I'd been driving since early evening, leaving Oklahoma City and aiming for a cheap motel somewhere past Tucumcari, New Mexico, but I pushed too late because I wanted to make time. The coffee in my thermos had gone from hot to metallic lukewarm, and my eyes felt dry like I'd been staring at the same taillight for hours. When the next big blue sign promised rest area 2 miles, I decided I'd stop, stretch, and walk around before I fell asleep with my hands on the wheel. I'm Megan, 26, and this was my first attempt at a cross-country trip alone. I'd planned it exactly: an oil change the day before, a full-size spare, pepper spray on my keychain, and the route pinned in both Apple and Google in case one app died. The car was a gray 2016 Corolla with one hubcap missing, embarrassing but reliable, and the trunk was packed with 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen stuff, and a plastic tub of cables I told myself I might need. I'd printed paper directions, too, which I kept folded in the center console like a superstition, even though I hadn't used paper maps since I was a kid. The only thing I hadn't planned for was how empty the desert could feel after midnight. The rest area sat back from the interstate behind a long curve of asphalt, the kind of pull-off you don't really see until you're on top of it. A row of sodium lights hummed over the parking lot, giving everything a flat orange tint that made my car look the color of old pennies. A couple of tractor trailers were lined up nose to tail near the far end, their engines idling with those deep diesel heartbeats that you don't so much hear as feel in your ribs. There was one other car, a black 4-door a few spaces down from where I parked, coated in dust and bug splatters like it had been in the same wind I had. The building was a low concrete block with a pitched roof, a state seal near the doors, and a faded poster warning against leaving kids or pets in hot cars. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and old mop water. Vending machines blinked along one wall, snacks, drinks, a machine selling overpriced earbuds, and a little kiosk with paper maps and brochures for caverns and museums I'd never visit. The fluorescent lights in the lobby flickered every few seconds in a way that made the shadows swim across the tiled floor. There was a counter under thick, scratched plexiglass with a bell and a sign that said information/attendant on duty, but the person behind it didn't react when I came in. They were seated on a high stool, head slightly bowed, one arm on the counter like they'd been caught mid-lean and frozen there. I tapped the bell once to be polite and instantly felt stupid for doing it. My voice sounded too loud when I said hello into the empty room, so I made it softer the second time. "Hey, sorry, just need the restroom." The seated figure didn't look up. For a second I was relieved. I've always hated when bored attendants stare at you like you're stealing something. But after a couple of beats, the relief was replaced with a prickly feeling under my sweater. I told myself they were half asleep from the graveyard shift and walked toward the women's room, which glowed a hard, too clean white under a separate strip of lights that didn't flicker. In the mirror, I looked like I'd been driving through a wind tunnel, messy bun, hoodie stretched at the cuffs, eyes pink at the corners. I washed my hands longer than usual just to enjoy the warmth and the sound of the running water. When I turned off the faucet, I noticed how quiet it was on the other side of the door. No radio, no chatter from a TV, no squeak of shoes. For some reason, I checked the time. 2:05 a.m. I dried my hands on the air dryer and took a breath like I was going to dive into a lake, which felt dumb enough that I surprised myself by laughing. Back in the lobby, the fluorescent tubes flickered twice in a row, and the vending machines somehow seemed louder, like they were the only living things in the building. The person behind the plexiglass was in the exact same position. I rang the bell again, less politely, and called, "Do you guys sell coffee filters? Mine broke." Then I cut myself off because I realized I was lying. The lie was just a thin excuse to force the person to move. They didn't. I stepped closer. There was a polite place to stand and a rude place to stand when you're facing a counter, and I crossed into the rude place, right up next to the scratched barrier, almost touching it like a pushy customer. The seated figure wasn't asleep or ignoring me. It wasn't moving at all because it wasn't a person. It was a laminated, life-sized printout of a smiling clerk in a polo shirt, taped up behind the plexiglass from the inside. The edges of the photo were curling slightly where the heat from a desk lamp had warped it, and on the counter below at the wrong angle, a bell sat in front of a little sign that said "Press for assistance," even though there was no one back there to answer. My first thought was that the state had gone so far into budget cuts they were now posting a cardboard clerk so we wouldn't complain nobody was on duty. Then I saw the details that made that thought fall apart. There was a doorway behind the counter with a key ring hanging from a hook at shoulder height, and the ring was swaying slightly. The swaying could have been caused by the air conditioner, except there was no vent above it, and the air in the room felt still and stale. On the floor to the right of the printed clerk, behind the counter area where customers couldn't go, there were 2 damp footprints leading from the back door toward the spot where the chair would be. Not a trail away, just those 2 prints and then nothing, like someone had stood there and then lifted their feet onto the rung of a stool to sit. I felt my scalp tighten the way it does when a noise wakes you up and your brain is still trying to decide if it's something to be afraid of. I leaned sideways to look down the short hallway that led to the bathrooms and the exit, and my peripheral vision told me something moved behind the plexiglass. When I forced myself to look back, the laminated smile was the same. The vending machine dropped a bag of chips somewhere to my left with a hard clang. The keyring was still swaying. I don't know why I whispered okay to nobody, but I did, and then I turned for the door. That's when I saw the motion outside, not on the pavement but reflected in the glass, a flicker of gray crossing right to left in the rectangle of my parked car. My brain stored the detail without letting me process it, like a Polaroid that hadn't developed yet. I pushed the door open and was hit by that cold, thin desert night air that smells like dust and dry plants, and the sound of a truck's fan somewhere far down the parking row. I took 3 steps into the lot and stopped. Someone was sitting in my driver's seat. It didn't click all at once. First, I thought I was looking at my own reflection wrong because the dome light wasn't on and the windows were slightly tinted, so it was just a faint outline of a head and shoulders against the driver's side window. The silhouette didn't match mine because it was taller than my headrest. Then the outline shifted the smallest amount, like the person adjusted their shoulders and the angle of their head turned. I remember the exact date and time because of what I told the officer later. It was 2:08 a.m. on a Thursday, and I felt my keys in the pocket of my hoodie like a lifeline. I didn't scream. What came out was this flat noise that wasn't even a word, more like a choked-up sigh that my throat forced out so I wouldn't pass out. I did the worst thing possible. I froze on the spot and stared, trying to make my brain catch up with what I was seeing. The person didn't open the door. They just reached up with their right hand, slow, deliberate, and touched the steering wheel at 12 o'clock like they were about to drive away. There was a dark shape on their hand that might have been a glove or just a shadow. A truck coughed to life down by the diesel row, and the sudden rumble snapped me out of it. I turned and speed-walked back to the building, resisting the urge to sprint because my legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and I didn't trust them not to trip. The glass door bumped the heel of my sneaker as I slipped inside and let it thump closed behind me. I went straight for the women's room not because it felt safer, but because it had a door I could latch. The chrome latch was small and cheap, but it clicked into place with a sound that made my heartbeat slow a fraction. I dug my phone out and saw 1 bar of service flicker in and out, so I dialed 911 and hoped the call would hold long enough to explain where I was. The operator answered with a calm tone that always sounds like it's being piped in from a clean office somewhere far away. I said my name and tried to give the mile marker I'd seen a few minutes earlier, 311 or 312, I wasn't sure, and that I was at a rest area on I-40 somewhere east of Tucumcari. "Someone's in my car," I said. "I locked it, I swear I did, I don't know how." The operator cut through my babbling to ask if I was inside a building and if I could stay put, and I said yes, women's restroom, door latched. She told me a state police unit was en route from Tucumcari and estimated 20 to 30 minutes, depending on where the trooper was when he got the call. 20 to 30 minutes felt like a joke and a lifetime at the same time. She asked if I could describe the person. I said no, just a silhouette, and she told me not to approach them. "We'll stay on the line until the unit arrives," she said. The connection popped and hissed like it was underwater, and I realized I was holding my breath again. That was the moment the building door creaked open. The lobby had been silent enough that the hydraulic door closers sounded like a shout. I put my palm over my mouth without thinking, and my hand came away damp. Through the phone, the operator asked me to repeat something I hadn't heard myself say. The bathroom had 1 row of stalls and a row of sinks with a narrow gap underneath the door where I could see a slice of the tile floor in the lobby if I moved to the far end of the last stall. My shoes squeaked once against the tile as I shifted, and I wanted to kick them off for being loud. Footsteps, slow and careful, moved across the lobby into the short hallway. They weren't heavy boots or hard heels, just the soft, rubbery tread of sneakers rolling heel to toe like whoever was wearing them was used to walking without being heard. The steps stopped at the entrance to the women's room. My throat made a sound that might have been a swallow or a word. The operator said my name like a question. The door opened. It wasn't dramatic. The hydraulic arm made it move in that smooth arc, like this was any other night and I was any other traveler washing my hands at the sink. The footsteps came in and slid across the tile. They paused in the middle of the room, and I realized I was counting my heartbeats because I was afraid I'd sneeze if I let myself breathe normally. There is nothing in this world like being stuck in a stall trying to be quiet, while someone stands on the other side of a flimsy metal door, wondering if you're in there. The footsteps moved one stall past me and stopped. There was the tiniest sound, like a person shifting their weight. I could see a fraction of their shoes through the gap near the floor. Black running shoes, dirt ground into the fabric, the kind of shoes you wear if you move around a lot. They stood there long enough that my legs started to tingle with pins and needles. Then, as if they were listening to something I couldn't hear, they took one step backward and one to the side, and their shoes disappeared from the gap. The faucet at the sink turned on for half a second, then off. The hand towel dispenser rattled like someone slapped it with the back of their hand. My phone speaker let out a tiny burst of static, and I flinched so hard the latch clicked against the metal, which felt like the loudest sound I'd ever made. The footsteps paused. I closed my eyes and pressed my head against the painted metal. The footsteps went to the door. The door side shut. The steps moved away down the hall. I tasted metal from breathing through my mouth for so long. The operator asked softly if I was still there and if I could tell where the person had gone. I said I didn't know, and my voice was lower than a whisper without me trying to make it that way. In the quiet that followed, I heard my own car horn chirp once, just that high, quick beat modern cars make when you lock them or hit the panic button. The kind of sound you can trigger from a fob you have in your hand. I looked down at my keys to make sure mine were still there, and they were, cold and sharp against my palm. The sirens didn't come fast. They never do when you need them. When I finally heard that rising Doppler whine across the interstate and back into the rest area lot, it started as a thread of sound and grew until blue and red lights stuttered against the ceiling tiles through the bathroom door gap. The operator told me the trooper had arrived, and I waited for footsteps that sounded like confidence before I unlatched the door. I walked out into the lobby on shaky knees and felt like I'd been underwater for a week. The trooper was older with a gray mustache that made his mouth look sympathetic even when he wasn't talking. He kept his voice low, like he'd seen too many people like me at 2 a.m. He asked me to point out my car, and I told him I didn't want to walk out there yet, and he nodded and said he'd check first. I watched him cross the lot in a calm, measured way that made me feel a little like a scared kid and a little angry at myself for being one. He looked inside my Corolla with his flashlight, then pulled the handle. It was locked. He took a lap around it and looked at the passenger side, then the back. He called out for me to come over only when he'd checked everything. "No one's in there now," he said when I got close enough to hear. The driver's seat was pushed all the way back like someone tall had been sitting there, and the side mirror on that side was turned out of alignment with where I keep it. I could see my own face distorted in the curved plastic like a funhouse reflection. The trooper asked me to unlock the car and see if anything was missing. The glove box was still stuffed with my dumb paper directions, the center console still held my pack of gum, and the worn hoodie I kept in the back seat was there. And then I saw it, hanging from the rearview mirror, a green tree-shaped air freshener I didn't own. It was the thick kind that comes in a plastic wrapper you're supposed to peel down bit by bit, and the wrapper was crumpled on the passenger seat like someone had opened it in a hurry. The smell was new car chemicals strong, masking everything else. "Sometimes folks leave these things like a joke," the trooper said in a way that told me it wasn't funny to him either. He took it off for me and set it on the roof, his eyes watching me more than the freshener. He motioned back toward the building and asked if I'd noticed anything off inside. I told him about the laminated attendant, the swaying key ring, and the wet footprints behind the plexiglass. He walked in, checked the counter area with his flashlight, and came back out with his mouth tighter than before. Said the rest area's visitor center closed at midnight, and that whoever set up the cardboard clerk was supposed to leave a small sign saying so, not a life-size smiling photo taped to the glass. The wet footprints and the swinging keys didn't fit with a building that had supposedly been empty for 2 hours. He said he'd call the county to send someone to check the rest of the place in the morning. He didn't say what we were both thinking. Somebody had been back there, and they had been back there recently. I asked if there were cameras, and he pointed out a black plastic dome near the ceiling by the door, then shrugged in a way that told me the answer. "Half the time those are dummies," he said. "Sometimes they're real but not connected to anything." He offered to follow me back to the interstate and sit behind me as far as the next exit, where there was a motel that took walk-ins at all hours. I said yes so fast that I didn't realize how it sounded until I heard my own voice. He idled behind me on the on-ramp with his lights off, but his presence was obvious in my rear window. The interstate felt safer with a cruiser in my mirror, even if he hung back 2 car lengths to let me set the pace. We peeled off one exit later into a tiny cluster of lights, 2 gas stations, a closed diner, and a low motel that looked like the kind of place truckers use when the hours catch up to them. At the front desk, the night clerk slid a registration card toward me like they'd done it 1,000 times and told me breakfast was a wrapped muffin and coffee starting at 6. In the room, I leaned against the door after I locked it and double-latched it, just feeling the solid weight of wood and metal between me and the hallway. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the silhouette in my driver's seat, head tilting the smallest degree, hand reaching up to the wheel like they were trying my position on for size. On the second try, I got up and plugged in my dash cam to my laptop. It's a cheap one my dad got me for Christmas, just in case, and I realized I'd left it running because I hadn't bothered to switch it off after the sun went down. The dashcam files had those cryptic timestamps baked into the names. I scrubbed through the late ones from that night, fast-forwarding the wind and the black highway and the pale stretch of lane lines zipping past. When the files ticked over to 2:00 a.m., I slowed down. The camera doesn't record when the car is off, but there's a parking mode that kicks on when it senses motion. There were 3 short clips, each about 20 seconds, recorded between 2:06 and 2:10 a.m. at the rest area. I clicked the first one with my mouth already dry. The first clip was angled forward through the windshield, and for the first 10 seconds it was just the parking lot in soft orange light. Then from the left edge of the frame, a shape slid into the driver's side, fast and low, like someone ducking just below the window line while they approached. The door didn't open. The shape disappeared from the frame, must have been along the driver's side, and then the camera jittered as if something bumped the car. Just before the clip ended, the interior of the car got a shade darker, the way it does when someone blocks the light. The second clip started with the steering wheel in the lower frame and the windshield beyond it. It took me a second to realize the dashcam had switched to the interior lens. Someone was seated in my driver's seat, but because it was night, all I could really see was a silhouette with a cap pulled low and a hoodie pulled up around the neck. They didn't look at the camera. They sat perfectly still for the first 10 seconds, then lifted their right hand and touched the wheel, tracing the top edge with one finger like they were feeling for wear. They kept their heads slightly turned toward the building, as if listening. Third clip flared because my headlights, or maybe a truck's lights, hit the windshield for a second. The figure in my seat flinched, then leaned forward toward the dash. Even blown up on my laptop screen, I couldn't pull a face out of the grain. But their profile came into sharp relief for 1 second as they lined in, a long nose, no facial hair, and a mouth set in a line. They reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror. The clip ended with the mirror pointed too high, catching only the top of the back seat. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, the motel light made everything look normal again. When I went out to the car, I saw a scratch in the dust on my driver's window about the size of a dime, like someone ran a key or a coin there when they leaned in. There wasn't a mark on the door frame or the lock. There was nothing to make sense of how they'd gotten inside or why they hadn't tried to take the car. The only things that had changed besides the seat and the mirror were the center console lid. It was closed when I left it open. Inside, the little slot where I kept spare quarters for tolls was empty. At the next gas station, I told myself I'd get a different air freshener just to erase that smell, but I couldn't walk down the aisle where they flicked back and forth on plastic hooks. I looked up locks and window sensors on my phone and ended up ordering 2 different ones to be delivered wherever I landed that week. I told my mom everything except the part where I almost opened the bathroom stall when the footsteps were right there. I didn't tell anyone about the laminated clerk because it sounded like something you get teased for noticing. A month later, back home, I parked in the same spot outside my apartment complex where I always do, under a yellow streetlight that turns the sycamore leaves pale. It was a Thursday again. I'd gotten comfortable checking the back seat before I got in, tapping the lock button as I walked away, trying not to live like a person waiting to be touched on the shoulder by a stranger. That night I took my trash to the dumpster and came back to find my driver's seat pushed all the way back again, the mirror turned outward, and a single quarter sitting heads up in the center console slot where I'd kept a stack of them before. No broken glass, no open doors, no sign of anyone, just the coin in the seat like someone had tried me on for size again. I didn't report that one. I don't know what I would have said to make it sound real. I started parking in different places around the complex, switching it up sometime during the day so no one could predict which car was mine in that line of regulars. Sometimes, when I drive past a rest area now, I watch for the windows of the visitor center and try not to look for a smiling clerk who never blinks. I keep the dash cam running and I lock the doors, and I try to ignore how often my seat feels slightly wrong in the morning. Last week I opened my glove box to grab the paper directions I never use anymore because I'd promised myself I'd throw them out. The papers puffed up the way they do when the cabin fan hits them, and a business card slid down from where it had been tucked up under the plastic lip of the dashboard. It was blank except for a blue stamp in the corner, a highway symbol with I-40 in tiny font, the kind you'd see on a free brochure rack. On the back in pencil, someone had written 2:14 a.m. and nothing else. That night when I got in to drive to work, the rearview mirror was already set too high. I didn't touch it. I drove with the top of the back seat filling the glass, and when I stopped at the first red light, I finally looked up. I don't know what I expected to see. But in the middle of my own windshield, in the thin layer of dust none of us ever really notice, someone had drawn a fingertip smile and two oval eyes, right where a face would be if it were looking in from outside. I wiped it away with the back of my hand and didn't look again until I got where I was going. First time a voice on my CB said my name before I did, the highway looked like an open zipper and I was the pull tab. It was 2:11 a.m. on a Wednesday, somewhere on I-80 in western Nebraska. I'd been running west since sundown with a dry van bound for Salt Lake. The cab smelled like coffee and warm plastic, and the heater ticked in the dash like a house settling. I'm Caleb, 42, out of Joplin, Missouri. 20 years behind the wheel will teach you the music of a truck. I know which switches loosen in winter, which cup lids rattle at 70, and which slabs of old concrete buzz through the floor. Most months I run Midwest lanes, but when the rate is right, I aim for Wyoming in the open sky. Caleb, are you still rolling west? The voice said, clear as a phone call. I actually glanced at the passenger door like someone had opened it. The tone was thin and even, like a librarian telling you the time. I thumbed the mic and said, go ahead, trying to keep my voice level. I don't use my name on the radio. I use my handle, Mudflap, and only drivers who know me know the government one. I figured it was a prank from somebody who recognized my unit number at the Flying J in North Platte. Who's asking? I said. The voice didn't answer. It said, I-80 westbound, mile 222 coming up, still in that paper flat tone. I cut my eyes to the little counter where I tapped the last marker. 219 had just clicked past. It wasn't guessing, it was early. Skip happens when the sky turns into a mirror. You'll catch a guy in Tennessee like he's sitting in your lap, but Skip doesn't know your name and Skip doesn't know what's inside your cab. Photo of your girl on the visor, the voice said. She's 9 in that one. My fingers were already on the picture without me meaning to. Who is this? I asked. The chrome around the faceplate held a thin reflection of my eyes in the road. The voice said, you ran your mouth at a scale in Illinois about cheaters, then played dumb when the trooper came out. You told yourself if anyone asked, your radio was off. That's a dumb story from my 30s I've never told anyone. I flipped to channel 9 and asked if anyone heard a weird break. The board westbound came back with just crickets and nothing else. I flipped back to 19. The second my finger left the dial, the speaker popped. Don't tie up 9, the voice said, not unkind, just certain. Something crawled between my shoulder blades that wasn't cold or hot. It felt like being watched by your own shadow. At 2:24 a.m. I decided to test it. If you know me, I said, tell me what I'm holding. I picked up the lucky penny in the dash tray without telegraphing it. Copper, heads up, the voice said. The coin slipped, pinged on the rubber mat, and spun. I didn't want to say my wife's name on the air, and I didn't want to hand the thing anything. What's my route tomorrow? I asked instead. The voice gave me my delivery window and the turn down a frontage road that always feels like you're driving into someone's backyard. The TA shows 8:20, but you'll miss by 5, it added. You'll sit too long at the Flying J. I hit hands-free and called my wife because I needed a human voice. It rang twice, then her voicemail picked up. Greeting played, the CB said it along with her, matching the breath she takes in the middle. I hung up. You're sweating under your right arm, the voice said gently. At 2:31 a.m. it started getting ahead of me. If you've never had your words stolen, imagine hearing your own voice early. I should pull off, the voice said, and I felt my mouth forming that thought. I should pull off, my own voice said again on the CB with my exact cadence. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Stereo sign flashed 2 miles. 2 miles ahead, the radio said. Then my mouth, without my permission, shaped rest areas too dark, and the radio said at a half beat first. I slapped the back of my hand over my lips like that could stop the theft. The cab felt an inch smaller. Truckers have a petty trick where you key the mic and keep it keyed so nobody else can talk. I pressed the button, set the mic on the dash with the cable pulled tight, and waited. The speaker went flat, which is what it should do. Then under my own dead key, like a whisper under a door, it said, you can't keep yourself from yourself. I took the next exit. 4-way stop. One gas station was dark as a cave. A greasy paper bag tumbled in a slow circle against the pump. I eased into a gravel cutout beyond the overpass and set the brakes. Park, the voice said. Left turn signal still on. I killed the blinker and stared at the Eld like rules could anchor the world. I cut power to the CB. I pulled the fuse and dropped it in the cup holder. The speaker should have been dead plastic. The sound bled through so faint I thought it was my blood in my ears. I leaned in. Walk around, it said like a suggestion. We all do walk-arounds. I told myself I'd do it and prove radios without power don't talk. The night was never quiet. Distant semis droned on the overpass, and wind moved through dry grass with a tiny hiss. My boots crunched, my breath smoked, and the running lights painted the gravel in neat amber ovals. If someone was out there, they were patient and good at the game. I started at the nose and touched each steer tire like I always do, habit more than science. Down the passenger side, I shined my light across the trailer wall and checked the locks. In the stainless fuel tank, I caught my reflection, cap, hoodie, and the same face I've had since I learned this job. You missed a step, the radio said from the silent cab. When I looked under the trailer, nothing waited there except cold air. I climbed back in and slammed the door harder than necessary. The dome light flickered, died, then came back when I smacked it with my knuckle. I slid the fuse back into place because part of me needed rules again. The hiss returned like an aquarium bubbler. I asked if anyone had ears at my mile. Nothing answered. At 2:47 a.m. the voice returned. "Seatbelt," it said, too gentle to be mocking. "Don't freeze too long." I was wearing it and had frozen, and hearing it put heat in my face. I eased onto the ramp and merged. My hands shook like they did the night I taught my wife to use a clutch on a county road. I tried to outrun it with numbers. Miles to Echo Canyon, gallons since the last fill, and sigh on the drives. For a few seconds it worked. Then the speaker murmured my math, including the mistake I was about to make because of a closure in Wyoming. I hadn't seen the closure yet. The map was already red when I glanced down. Every time I thought hard to drown it, got there first. "Don't look at the shoulder," it said, and my eyes went there anyway. "Don't think about deer," it said, and my hands tightened because this is deer hour. "Don't say the prayer you only say when you're alone," it said, and the shape of those old words rose and turned to ash. By 3:02 a.m., it started giving orders in a calm tone that reminded me of nurses. "Left lane," it said 30 seconds before I saw the flashing hazards of a maintenance truck. "Brake now," it said, and a retread scissored through my beams like black confetti. I did what it told me. When the road smoothed out, I realized I'd been holding my breath. I switched the radio off, and I turned it back on because the silence wasn't better. "What are you?" I asked the dark ahead. The CB clicked, and my own voice came out. "Breaker 19, any takers for a southbound?" It was me from some other night, down to the tired warmth I get when I'm not alone. I pictured the mic dragging behind me, still talking. At 3:19 a.m., my daughter's name came out of the speaker, and it didn't stop with the name. It recited her text about a spelling test and the corny line I sent back. Then it told a story I told her about a barn cat that used to sleep in my dad's boots. Then it said something nobody knows. In a hospital room 8 years ago, while my wife slept, I whispered to my newborn that I was scared I wasn't built for this, and I'd try anyway. I wanted to rip the cokes, break the antenna, and do something dumb and loud. Instead, I grabbed my paper logbook, the one I keep even with the L because old habits die slow, and flipped to a blank page. I wrote, "If you're ahead of me, tell me what I write next." My hand shook. I didn't write the obvious. I wrote 4 words my dad used when he was angry, a line I hate. The radio spoke to them in my voice, gentle. I wrote another line I hadn't fully formed yet. The radio read it. Then my pen slid into a faint groove across the paper, a ghost line pressed from something written before. It was my handwriting. The sentence it traced was the next thing I was about to write. I tried to skip ahead and trick it. The ghost line was already there too. Just before 4:00 a.m., I rolled into a love with too many trucks and not enough spaces. The fuel island was lit like a dentist's office, and the store hummed with refrigerators. I parked crooked in a knot spot because I couldn't make myself back. The radio gave me that mercy. It went quiet. I washed my face with paper towels and stared at a sign that said, "Please limit showers 2:30 minutes," like it was scripture. When I came back out, the cab smelled like burnt coffee and that little pine tree freshener that always makes my throat itch. I sat with the door open to the cold and waited for proof that the world was shared. Footsteps, a cough, the click of a lighter. The CB made a small hopeful fizz. I turned it down to almost nothing and left it there. Sleep wasn't coming. I watched other trucks angle in and out like tired animals finding places to lean. At first light, I got back on the interstate. Things are easier in daylight even when they aren't better. The miles to the delivery ticked down. The radio didn't speak. For an hour it was just weather and the hollow whistle you get when wind cuts across a rock wall. I hit the detour the voice mentioned and took it with a ribbon of trucks. When I got my paperwork, I tore a sticky note off the pad in the door pocket to write the timeout. I don't know why I flipped the pad first. On the back of that top sheet was a sentence in my handwriting. The ink matched my pen but was smudged like I'd written it an hour earlier. It said, "Don't answer the next one." I slid the note under the mat without thinking. Drivers like me share stories until they're polished smooth. A good one gets traded at counters and fuel islands and grows edges it didn't earn. If this was a prank, the person deserves an award for patience and cruelty, and something I can't name. If it wasn't, then I learned something about the space between a thought and a sound that I can't fix. I've stopped trying to decide which option is worse. I keep the CB on now more than I used to, not because I want to hear it, but because I want to know when it's quiet. Most nights it's the normal chore, eastbound bear in the median, hammered down after the 255, left lane for a wide load. When it talks like that, it feels like church. On a handful of nights since sometime between 2 and 4, something rises under the hiss that sounds like someone I know very well. It waits, I don't answer, I try not to think in sentences. I give my mouth sunflower seeds and let numbers fill the dark. It still finds a way sometime. Last week on I-70 near the Kansas line, I swore I wouldn't give it a single word worth stealing. I made it 20 miles, and I thought I should call my daughter and tell her I was proud. The CB clicked gentle like a tongue against teeth, and my own voice whispered, "Already did," half a second before I breathed in to say it. I know the shape of my highway the way you know the shape of your own hand, but the night I saw a brand new exit where there shouldn't be one, I realized the road knew me back. It was a Thursday in late October, the kind where the clouds hang low and sodium lights turn everything the color of weak tea. I'd wrapped a network install at a small clinic and started the 2-hour ride home later than I meant to. The dash clock slid past 1:37 a.m. while the heater hissed through a vent that always rattles on cold nights. The tires hummed that steady 2-lane lullaby that either keeps you awake or rocks you into a mistake. I'm Jordan, 33. I do commercial networking, pull cable, mount access points, and babysit printers that decide to become villains at 4 p.m. on Fridays. My run is a ribbon of interstate that slices fields and a low ridge before emptying into the same 2 towns I always end up in. I can tell you where the shoulder softens after heavy rain, and which overpass funnels a crosswind hard enough to nudge you half a lane if you're not ready. Most weeks I commute this stretch twice, out at dawn, back after dinner, at hours when the rest of the county goes quiet and the wildlife gets brave. That night I topped off at a pilot near exit 39 around 11, grabbed a burger I regretted 3 bites in, and got back on the road. I passed exit 41 at 1:52 a.m. and mentally checked it off, because after 41 the next one is 45. That's how it's been since I learned to drive. 41 trees, then 45, and the predictable glow of a strip mall with a 24-hour pharmacy. No choices, no surprises. That reliable emptiness is the point. You just go. 2 miles past 41, a green sign rose out of the dark like a stage prop being pushed into place. Exit 43 in white block letters, a right arrow, county line spur. Beneath it, a skinny services sign with little logo squares sat blank, just blue squares with no brands, like someone forgot to finish the job. I slowed without deciding to, the way you do when a cruiser sits in the median even if you're 5 under. My dash GPS showed nothing but the thick blue interstate and a dull smear of forest. No ramp, no road, no exit to match the sign glowing 5 feet outside my windshield. I tapped the screen to zoom. The pixels grew, the map didn't. My phone had 1 bar and no data. The beige void with a blue dot didn't change. Outside, the sign looked official enough to throw proper green onto the galvanized guardrail bolts. I told myself it must be new. Maybe last week it was bagged in black plastic and I just didn't notice. Maybe the state app hadn't updated. Either way, the arrow sat there like a dare. Curiosity is a dumb game to play after midnight, but I took the exit. The ramp sloped through a cut in the pines, and the rumble strip buzzed under my tires in that corrugated way you feel in your teeth. At the bottom, a stop sign where there should have been a yield sat beside a metal call box with its little door shut. The decal where the dot number should be was a rectangular ghost of glue, like someone peeled off the information and cleaned around it. The brand new street sign on the corner announced county line spur in reflective letters, so crisp they almost looked wet. I turned right, the 2-lane cut through trees and then into a wide, flat bowl where the land had been shaved down like they meant to build a lot more than they ever did. A single gas station sat there with all its lights on, a square cinder block box wearing a tired mansard roof and a 3-pump canopy that hummed and flickered. The price board used old flip numbers. The top of the sign read Fuel Food Lotto. No bird, no star, no splash, just the idea of a gas station, like something in a drawing. I pulled to the second pump and killed the engine. The air smelled like wet leaves and the sweet chemical edge of antifreeze. The pump had a card slot under a cracked plastic guard. The green LCD asked me to insert, then blinked see cashier the way old pumps do at 2 in the morning. The quiet felt staged. Even the crickets sounded turned down. I went inside because I wanted something ordinary to argue with fluorescent boredom to prove the place was harmless. A motion sensor bell made a tired ding. Checkerboard tile had gone gray with salt and age. The shelves were neat if you didn't look too close at the dust collected in the corners. I smelled mop water and the metallic warmth of a roller grill that had been cleaned an hour late. The counter held a jar of penny candy under plastic wrap and a rubber band and a display of keychains shaped like flip-flops. Behind the glass, a little TV played a looping weather radar with a crawl that read last update, 12:01 a.m. last month. Quick question, I said, because starting normal keeps things normal. The man behind the counter looked up like he'd been waiting to be useful. He was maybe 60, with thick glasses and a beard going newspaper gray. "When did they put in exit 43? I asked. He didn't glance at the door or the TV or anywhere else before he answered. He smiled like I'd asked if water is wet. "Been there," he said in that warm county voice. "Always been there." He said it the way some people say the pledge, automatic and easy. I must have made a face because he nudged a styrofoam cup toward me the same second the receipt printer chattered to life. "Coffee," he said, more reflex than sales pitch. The sleeve had no logo. The receipt read store and then nothing, then the date, which matched my phone, and the time, which ran 2 minutes ahead of my dash clock. The top line said exit 43, like it was the store's name. He slid over napkins and a wooden stirrer like he knew I'd reach for them, and I did. "Bathroom?" I asked out of habit. He pointed down a short hall with a buzzing light and a door labeled restroom in mismatched stick-on letters. I shook my head and thanked him instead. The TV flashed a radar from the storm I'd worked last month, a red stripe dragging over our county while my crew drove around waking up dark clinics. It was too specific to be generic. The idea that he was playing old, whether on purpose, tightened something between my shoulder blades. Outside, the canopy rattled in the wind. The coffee tasted exactly like gas station coffee should, hot, bitter, and a little comforting. Somehow that made me more uneasy. Back in the car, I looked at the receipt again. Exit 43. No address, no phone, time is still ahead. I slid it into the visor because tossing it out felt like littering in a place that watched. Heading back toward the ramp, the road didn't feel like the road I'd come in on. I passed a billboard skeleton and a fenced square of dirt with a state sign that read future site of county maintenance and a start date from last spring. The weeds around it were knee-high. My mirror showed the canopy behind me humming, then swallowed by trees. The sky felt lower than it had 10 minutes ago, like the clouds had stooped. I don't scare easy in a locked car with a full tank, but my fingers went cold on the wheel. I turned the radio on to fill the air. My usual station played a song that fell out of rotation a decade ago. The scan landed on another station playing the same band, like the whole county decided to do a reunion. At 2:14 a.m., I crested a low rise and saw the interstate. Relief hit so sharp it felt like pain. The ramp had another stop sign. I checked left, empty lanes, a black river, and merged. 2 seconds later, I was back on the main line, tucked between the tree line and the median, the stretch looking exactly like the place I'd left. The dash clock said 2:05 a.m., 9 minutes earlier than when I started up the ramp. I stared long enough that I drifted and had to correct. I told myself maybe I misread the time. Maybe the caffeine slipped my minutes. I promised myself I would pass exit 45 and that would be it. Instead, a green sign rose where I knew only trees should be. Exit 43, County Line Spur. This time the little service logos weren't blank. They showed brands that don't exist anymore, a fried chicken place from my childhood, a soda logo with a font no one uses now, and a blue lowercase e for dial-up internet. The green washed over my hands like an uninvited wave. I didn't take it, the sign slid past, the ramp fell away. A mile later, another exit 43 flashed the same green like an echo from a canyon you can't see. My phone still had 1 bar and no data. The map stayed a beige countertop with a dot crawling nowhere. Even the road noise shifted higher like new pavement that wasn't there. I started saying mile markers out loud to pin myself to something. 2:14, 2:13, the way you talk to a dog to keep it calm. When the ramp showed up a third time, anger beat fear for 1 solid second. I took it like ripping a Band-Aid. The cloverleaf spun me under the bridge, and I nosed into the first spot at the station because I couldn't pretend I hadn't been there now. Inside, the bell dinged. The man lifted his face before I cleared the door like he'd counted my steps. He slid coffee to the same spot on the counter without me asking. The printer chattered. The time printed is 5 minutes ahead of mine again. "You came back," he said, not a question, not surprised. "Is there another road out?" I asked, because asking made me feel like I still had choices. "Just the spur," he said, "left at county maintenance if you're curious." He tapped the counter where the penny candy had been. In its place sat a stack of free county maps, the folded kind with the county seal in the corner. The top map had a circle in blue pen around the stretch between 41 and 45 with an X inside the circle. The pen was uncapped, the tip gleamed like it had just been used. I could smell fresh ink. I took the map and felt warmth where a fingerprint had pressed through the paper. I pocketed both receipts because trashing them there felt wrong. Back outside, the wind had gone oddly still, like the world was waiting for a cue. I turned left at the county maintenance sign because he'd said it in a tone that slid past suggestion. A chain-link fence ran along pallets of bagged salt and a row of white-painted plow blades, edges dull with summer dust. A cinder-block building sat with a roll-up bay door and a small metal door with wired glass. I pulled close and shut the engine off. Night noise settled, a distant highway whir and a far-off train horn that could belong to any decade. Through the wired glass, I heard a radio, not music, but a voice reading weather in that old AM cadence, saying barometric and nor-northwest like words from a ritual. The metal handle turned in my palm with the sticky resistance of old paint. I didn't want to go in. Standing still felt worse. The door didn't fight me. Inside, a cold concrete floor, a pegboard with wrenches, a battered desk with a tiny desktop tower, and the radio. A 3-ring binder lay open under a gooseneck lamp. The radio's green eye glowed steadily. The voice named counties I didn't recognize. Under the lamp, the binder held color printouts and stapled receipts that looked exactly like the slip tucked in my visor. The first page showed the gas station under its humming canopy. The pumps matched the ones outside, flipped numbers and all. In the glass door reflection, a shape like me held a cup. Along the bottom, a dot matrix caption read Exit 43, opening day with a date from 13 years ago. The ink stuttered halfway through the last number, like the printer needed a ribbon it never got. Fingerprints smudged the corner. I told myself I would put the binder down and walk out. I turned one page. Receipts were stapled in neat columns. Every one said Exit 43 at the top. The dates walked through years, then months, then this week. 2 from tonight were already there. Someone had written came back next to one in pencil. The handwriting looked uncomfortably like mine from high school. I shut the binder too hard. My reflection doubled in the wired glass offset by the mesh, like there were 2 versions of me standing a quarter-inch apart. Outside, my car's brake lights glowed on the cinderblock wall. My keys were in my pocket. The brake lights went dark. The heater fan I'd left on clicked down a notch by itself. The car radio left scanning, caught 3 seconds of a song from 2012 and fell back to hiss. Warm plastic and old dust breathed out of the vents. I ran, not from a person, from the sense that I was getting edited out of my own night. I took the cloverleaf that should have put me on the highway eastbound because even the wrong way felt safer than standing still. The tires vibrated over expansion joints. At 2:13 a.m., the dash clock clicked to 2:14 and hung there like the second hand needed extra room. The air turned a few degrees colder against my knuckles. I didn't look for 43 again. I locked my eyes on the next mile marker and tucked in behind a semi at a respectful distance, like the trailer could draft me back into the normal world. By exit 45, the clock let go and started marching like usual. The gas station there was aggressively modern, lead glare, brand coffee, and a rack of phone chargers in sealed plastic. I sat at a plastic table facing the window and watched my car in the reflection until my hand steadied. The receipt in my visor felt heavier than paper. Home at 4:11, I laid the receipts on my kitchen table under the harsh overhead light. Exit 43, bold, times I didn't like. I told myself I'd throw them out. Instead, I slid them into the junk drawer under rubber bands and screws because trashing them felt like an invitation. I didn't tell my girlfriend because she'd say to stop taking weird detours after midnight, and I didn't want to argue about how an interstate can turn into a back road without moving an inch. A week later, I ran that stretch in the afternoon. Sun up, traffic, everything clean and flat. No exit 43, no county line spur. Between 41 and 45, trees, a brown sign for a historical marker, and a creek that flashes if you catch it right. I felt foolish for being afraid and foolish for being relieved. I set the cruise to a boring number like I could nail the world down with it. The sky looked honest again. That night on my couch, I opened my bank app because if anything is real, it's the number that leaves your account. The pilot charge sat right where it should. Beneath it, $3.24 from Fuel Food Lotto. No city, no zip, no phone. The pending icon never flipped to posted. 2 days later, it vanished like a typo you only catch between refreshes. I closed the app without breathing for a few seconds. I thought about calling DOT or the county sheriff to ask if they had a maintenance yard behind a road that doesn't show up on any map. I didn't want to hear laughter and I didn't want to hear silence. Instead, I bought a paper county map at a normal gas station, the folded kind with too many panels, and opened it on my hood. No county line spur. In the crease where 2 squares met, a faint pencil circle pressed through from somewhere, like someone had leaned on their copy while they marked mine. The graphite dusted my fingertip. The next Thursday, driving home before midnight for once, I passed 41 and said out loud, "If I see it in daylight, I'm not taking it." My voice sounded like I was trying to convince a passenger I couldn't see. The wind wrinkled the pines. I could see a mile down the right shoulder. No green sign. The spot where it would have been looked like the grass had grown in a different pattern, but maybe I wanted to see that. I slept fine for a week. Then I opened my glove box looking for a napkin, and a folded county map slid onto my lap, the same free kind with the county seal in the corner. I don't remember taking it. On the back, in neat block letters I don't write, someone had drawn a circle and written exit 43. Under at the time, 2:14 a.m., the same minute my dash clock had hung on when the air went cold. The pencil had pressed hard enough to emboss the paper. Now I keep that map in the trunk, folded wrong so it never lies flat. I tell myself I won't run that stretch after midnight anymore, and then I look at a work order and know I will because that's when clinics let us work. Sometimes, just before 41, the radio lands on a song I only ever hear in memories. Sometimes the dash clock ticks the same minute twice, like a hiccup. Once in bright sun, a state truck pulled out of a gravel gate I swear I'd never noticed. The driver didn't look at me, but the white plow blades strapped in the bed were the same shape as the ones behind that fence. I haven't seen the green sign again the way I saw it that first night, bright, official, unavoidable. But some exits you only need to take once for them to keep taking you. If you drive that stretch and 43 shows up where it shouldn't, don't. If you already took it, check your receipts. Check the backs of your maps. Check your rear view before you merge. You'll know it when the air inside the car drops a few degrees, like you drove through a shadow with weight. And if you stop for coffee that tastes exactly like every gas station coffee in America, keep the cup. The next morning I found a tiny green smear on my windshield where the wipers never reach, a fingertip trail like someone traced an arrow pointing right in the dust. I didn't wipe it. I didn't want to find out what happens if you ignore a sign that isn't supposed to exist. The rain made the highway look like it was trying to rinse itself off the map, and I realized it was the kind of night where a mistake doesn't announce itself, it just waits. My wipers were doing that squeak-slap thing old blades do when they're losing the fight, and the defogger kept turning the windshield into a soft gray veil. The clock on my dash said 1:58 a.m., a time that doesn't feel like night or morning, just a thin place between. It was just me, a two-lane stretch of US 26 west of town, and the hiss of water under my tires. I didn't feel alone until I did. I'm Leela, 28, born and raised in Oregon, working second shift at a hospital registration desk. When I clock out late, I take the long way home to avoid the drunk stretch near the bars because I've seen those charts too many times. My car is a 2012 Honda Civic with 2 stubborn dashboard lights and a sun visor that won't stay up anymore unless I jam a receipt under it. I keep a little flashlight in the door pocket and a small can of pepper spray on my key ring, more for habit than heroics. I'm careful without calling it fear because I hate giving that word credit. The rain had settled into that steady, heavy sheet where the lane reflectors bloom in the dark like tiny blue eyes. The sign for exit 17 slid past greasy with water, and I thumbed the wiper speed up another notch even though it was already working hard. Semi-trucks would roar by in the left lane and dump a wave on me like a thrown blanket, and I'd hold my breath until my headlights found the road again. Out here, the trees grow right up to the shoulder, and the shoulder dips in places like it remembers mudslides. Most nights I like the privacy. That night, it felt like the woods were leaning in. I saw her at 2:06 a.m. because I remember telling the officer the time later. A figure on the right shoulder, thumb out, hair plastered to her face under the yellow of a rain slicker. She didn't hold a sign or a bag. She just stood under all that water with her hand extended like she hadn't learned what do means the way girls do. I wasn't going to stop, not on that road, not in that weather. Even slowing down was a debate with myself. Her face turned toward my car the exact second my headlights hit her, and I saw a pale circle and eyes that didn't squint against the glare. I passed, and the guilt hit with that hollow drop you get when you hang up on someone mid-sentence. I told myself it was irresponsible, and that I would do neither of us any favors by pulling over on a slick shoulder where the ditch drops like a trap. I told myself I'd call it in at the next exit. I even started rehearsing the good citizen line to the non-emergency number. There's a woman hitchhiking in the storm, sounds reasonable until you admit you didn't help her. I checked the rear view out of reflex. She was in my back seat. It was so wrong that my mind rejected it at first. It tried to make her a jacket, a shadow, and a headrest at a trick angle. The dome light hadn't come on, my door hadn't opened, but there she was, sitting behind the passenger seat with her shoulders a little hunched like she was trying not to take up space. Water dripped from the hem of the yellow slicker and collected in a dark patch on the seat, then onto the floor mat. I smelled creek water and cold metal, the kind that gets in your nose and won't leave. I didn't slam the brakes because muscle memory knows better than panic sometimes, and this road will punish a sudden move. My fingers went numb on the steering wheel, and my mouth remembered how to breathe in tiny, quiet sips. I kept shifting my eyes from the road to the mirror because I needed her to flicker and disappear, but she didn't. Her face was slightly turned toward the passenger window, like she was watching the rain run sideways. It wasn't a monster face or a horror mask. It was just a woman's face, mid-20s maybe, soaked, past the point of shaking, calm in a way that means something else is wrong. I tried to speak, and what came out wasn't words at first, just this paper-thin sound of air. "Are you okay?" I managed, and my voice sounded like a stranger's from the space between my seat and the steering wheel. No answer. Her head tilted a few degrees like she was listening to the storm talk. A drop of water fell from a strand of hair and hit the vinyl with a sound I could hear over the engine. There's a light on my dash I never notice until it dings, the rear seat belt indicator that only cares if someone buckles. It pinged once, then went quiet. I watched the tiny icon of a person with a belt glow, then flicker like a heartbeat, then disappear. Either she was too light for the sensor or she wasn't heavy at all, but I didn't think of science in that moment. I thought of stories you repeat to scare yourself awake and how you promise you don't believe them. The radio had been off because on nights like this, I like hearing the rain talk to the car. It clicked on by itself and landed between stations. A band of white noise like TV static used to sound in waiting rooms. Through it, I heard a few words and didn't know if they were lyrics or a voice under the hiss. "Not here," it said, or the sound shaped itself into that phrase because I needed it to. I reached for the knob, like turning it could change the rules. At 2:12 a.m., I passed a blue sign announcing a rest area in 2 miles. The little icon showed a picnic table and a bathroom, like a promise that the world organizes itself, even in weather like this. The presence in the back seat didn't move, her shoulders didn't rise, her hands stayed inside the sleeves, but I felt a weight pressed gently against the back of my seat, like when someone behind you shifts forward at a red light. The defogger fought and lost. A film crept back onto the inside glass. I swiped a clear crescent with my sleeve and met my eyes for a split second in the mirror. They looked wide in a way that belongs to deer. I told myself I would pull into the rest area, park near the lights, and figure out what kindness looked like. That wasn't a mistake. I tried to put my plan into a sentence so my brain would follow it, but the sentence broke into letters. The wipers did one slow arc even though I hadn't changed the setting. Then they jumped to their fastest and stayed there. The yellow slicker in the mirror had new details as the glass cleared in slices. A missing bottom snap and a dark shape under the collar like a bruise or dirt. I dialed 911 with the hand that wasn't part of the steering wheel. The call went through because I heard the clean office voice even with my ear full of rain noise and my own pulse. I said my name and the road and my mile marker, and that there was a woman in my car I didn't pick up. Saying it made it sound like a lie even to me. The operator asked if someone had forced entry, and I said I didn't know and I didn't think so and I couldn't explain. And then she told me to pull off the road in a safe, well-lit area and wait in the locked car with the engine running. The back seat shifted like someone sliding a little closer to the door. Water ran in a narrow stream down the seat belt strap and pooled where the buckle meets the receptacle. The dome light flickered like an old fluorescent hum the exact second the operator asked if the person posed a danger. That question pulled something stupid out of my mouth, and I said, "I don't think she wants me to stop." The operator paused and asked me to repeat that, and I realized I'd said it like an answer, not a feeling. The rest area exit came up at 2:14 a.m. and I put my blinker on. The clicking sound was suddenly too loud in the small world of the car. The slicker in the mirror turned its face a fraction of an inch toward me, not enough to show a full profile, just enough to change the angle of a cheek and the edge of an eye. On the inside of the windshield, on the fog my sleeve hadn't cleared, a line appeared as if a fingertip were writing from the wrong side. A slow, watery letter formed, and then O. I went past the exit like the road pushed me. The operator told me to proceed to the next safe location and to avoid driving onto the shoulder in these conditions. I said okay because that's what you say. My hands had gone clammy on the wheel. The heater fan changed pitch without me touching it, and the air coming out went colder, like someone had held the temperature control in their palm and turned it until it had no clicks left. A mile later, red and blue lights strobed dimly through the rain behind me. For a second I thought it was for me, and I was grateful because a man with a badge and a coat would make this feel like the kind of problem that has forms. But the lights pulled onto the rest area ramp I had just passed, and for 2 seconds I saw the tilted shape of a pickup resting nose down in the drainage ditch by the entrance, hazards clicking a tired yellow. The way it sat looked like a wet milk carton someone had squeezed. The same ramp I would have taken if I hadn't understood no when I saw it written on glass. I told the operator what I saw, and my voice came out flat like it wasn't attached to me. She said a trooper would check the scene, and if I didn't need immediate assistance, to continue 3 more miles to the gas station at exit 20 and wait there. That direction had weight. The wet shape in my back seat didn't agree or protest. She had stopped being a person and became a presence, the way you know someone is in your room before you open your eyes. At 2:21 a.m., the radio slid from static to station playing a hymn my grandmother liked, the kind they sing in small churches with too much carpet and not enough people to fill the back rows. It wasn't a station I knew in that area. The words about rest and shelter hit the inside of my skull like a memory that isn't yours. I didn't look back because my neck felt locked in place the way old doors stick in humidity. In the mirror in the corner of my eye, the slicker's hood shifted again like a nod. The gas station at exit 20 is a chevron that never looks bright enough even when every light is screaming. I took the ramp slower than I needed to because the concrete held a shine I didn't trust. The The lot had two other cars tucked by the store, and a semi on the far edge with its orange running lights lining the trailer like a string of tiny pumpkins. I parked under the canopy and put the car in park with my finger and thumb like the rest of my hand was attached to something else. Then I locked the doors even though I was in the car. I didn't turn around, I just stared at the convenience store window with its posters for cigarettes and propane and a cardboard cutout of a smiling iced coffee like a person. The operator told me a deputy was 5 minutes out and to keep my doors locked. 5 minutes can be nothing, or it can be a lifetime that slides sideways. The air thickened in the car like breath had nowhere to go. The defogger lost again without a fight. Next to me on the glass from the inside this time, a larger circle cleared as if someone had pressed their palm there and held it. 5 wet marks spread inside it like the pads of fingers. They were small. It wasn't the hand of a man. Each finger slid slightly, then lifted. Where it left, the glass fogged back over. My own hands were in my lap, motionless. I'd never felt so much like a witness to my life instead of the person having it. The deputy rolled up at 2:27 a.m. and parked nose to nose with me, his light bar off, his takedown lights on. He got out with his hat on even in the rain because some people wear their job the way other people wear a favorite jacket. He approached on my driver's side with his hands behind his flashlight, and his voice when he told me to lower my window 2 inches was calm in a way you can tell is practiced. I did what he asked and said there was someone in my back seat. Saying it again made the world go a little blurry. He angled his flashlight into the rear and squinted the way people do when they expect to see something and are disappointed to find a reflection of themselves. "I don't see anyone," he said. He wasn't unkind about it. He asked if I wanted him to open the rear door, and I nodded so hard my teeth clicked. He tried the handle. It was locked. I thumbed my key fob, and he opened it and angled the light in the way you do when you're checking for a stray dog. The seat was wet. The floor mat held a small dark pool that climbed the ridges and stopped. There were leaves stuck to the rubber, the long skinny kind that float on top of rainwater and then glue themselves down when the water recedes. He touched one with his pen and it smeared like it had been there a minute, not hours. He made a face he probably didn't mean to make and then arranged his mouth back into neutral. "Did you spill anything?" he asked. I shook my head. He asked me to step out and stand under the canopy while he looked around. I didn't want to open my door because it meant giving something away in or out, and I didn't know which to fear more. I did it anyway. The rain under the canopy came down in curtains beyond the edge, a neat vertical line like a shower. The station clerk watched us with that bored curiosity of a night shift person who has seen enough to expect nothing. The deputy checked my trunk and peered under the car with his flashlight and said he didn't see anyone, which I already knew. He took my license and stepped back to the cruiser, and I stood there hugging my arms against myself and stared at the puddle near my rear wheel. In it, the canopy lights wobbled like a trapped sky. Something rippled across the reflection like a footstep in the water that didn't make a sound. I looked up too fast. The world went tiny with black dots for a second. When my vision came back, the back door of my car was shut again, and I didn't remember seeing him close it. He handed my license back with a clean, practiced motion and said if I wanted an escort home, he could follow me to my exit as long as it wasn't out of his way. He didn't write anything down and he didn't ask me to. He didn't say the part about ghosts because no one says that out loud in a uniform, but I could feel the shape of it in what he didn't ask. I told him I lived 2 exits down. He nodded and said, "I'll be right behind you," which sounded like a promise and an apology at the same time. Followed at a decent distance, and the sight of anyone in my rear view who wasn't her made the road line up like a track again. By the time I turned onto my street, the rain had softened into something between drizzle and mist, and I started to believe in regular life. I parked under the dull amber of the lot light outside my building and sat there with my hands in my lap and waited for gratitude to show up. The deputy rolled by slow, tapped his siren once like a polite goodnight, and kept going. When I looked in the back seat again, it was empty in the way things are when they've never held anything. There was a water line on the seat like an outline where a body's shoulders would be if bodies soaked through. My floor mat squelched when I lifted it. A smell like wet leaves and cold pennies hung in the fabric. I left the windows cracked and the doors locked and went upstairs feeling like my clothes were heavier than they are when they're dry. I didn't sleep right away. I sat on my couch and let the quiet of my apartment press on me until my heartbeat slowed and my eyes stopped jumping to corners. When I finally stood up to take a shower, I pulled my keys out of my hoodie pocket and a small object fell onto the rug. I thought it was a coin. It was a round pin the size of a quarter with a background of blue and a white serif font that said Girl Scout Cookie Drive, April 2001. The pin was cold in a way that felt like it came from outside, not my pocket. I hadn't been in Girl Scouts. That April I would have been 4. The next afternoon, when the sky was polite and the roads were dry, I took my car to the vacuum station by the car wash and cleaned out the back seat because that's what you do when something unsettles you. You erase the evidence, even if you're the only one who saw it. Under the seat I found a thin rectangle of paper that had turned soft from water. It was a photo strip, 4 pictures, the kind you get from a bowling alley booth. 2 girls with wet hair and big smiles in plastic rain ponchos, cheeks pressed together, each frame stamped with a date I couldn't quite read because the ink had bled. In the last frame, a yellow slicker hood sat on the left girl's shoulder. I told myself I would drop the pin in the photo strip in the lost and found at work because that's where abandoned things go to prove the world is orderly. I put them in a sandwich bag and left them in the console. I made it 2 days of normal before it rained again. On the first heavy night on the same road, the wipers picked up the old squeak and the lanes turned into tunnels of light. I passed exit 17, and before I could promise myself anything, I looked where the shoulder meets the trees. She stood there again at 2:04 a.m., thumb out, yellow shining like a memory your brain holds in its teeth. I didn't stop, and the guilt layered itself over the earlier guilt until it was thick and heavy. I checked the mirror because I had to. The back seat was empty. For 6 seconds I believed that the rules had reset. At 2:06 a.m., my rear seat belt icon pinged once and went dark. I didn't look back. I stared at the road like it was the only thing keeping the car in one piece, and listened to the way the rain changed pitch when it hit the roof at highway speed, and then softened and then picked up again like hands drumming the hood. The heater pulled cold in a breath like it had opened its mouth to the outside for a taste. On the inside of the windshield, on a clean path the defogger had carved and then lost, a word appeared again in watery letters the size of a palm. This time it didn't say no, it said home. I took the next exit and looped the long way around toward the old side road that runs past the community center and the high school. The rain thinned as if it had given up, and the streetlights out there are spaced far enough apart that it feels like you're moving between islands. I kept waiting for the presence to do something, tap, whisper, reach, and it didn't. The only sound was the wiper motor and a faint drip inside the cabin, steady as a clock. Near the elementary school there's a weathered signboard people use for yard sale arrows and lost cat notices. Someone had stapled up a flyer under the plastic cover that looked faded through the water. It was a low-res print of a missing persons bulletin with 2 girls' photos side by side, the tops of their slickers just visible. The date on the bottom was 20 years old, and the contact number had the old 3-digit exchange. I didn't stop to read their names because somehow I already knew I'd find the wrong kind of confirmation. I drove past, and the rain chose that second to slam back into heavy, like the sky had been waiting to decide. I pulled into my apartment lot and parked under that amber light again and realized I was holding my breath like a kid who runs past a dark doorway. When I let it out, it fogged the driver's window even though the car wasn't warm inside. I turned to the back seat slowly, the way you open a door after you know there's nothing behind it. The seat looked dry in the lazy way of late-night light that hides stains. The sandwich bag in my console had fogged, and the metal pin inside had a tiny crescent of rust on the edge it didn't have yesterday. I still take that road home after late shifts because shortcuts are how you explain yourself to tomorrow. It hasn't happened every storm. Some nights it's just rain and bad wipers and the knowing that the woods could hold anyone. But on 3 nights since, when my clock slips past 2:00 a.m., the rear seat belt chime pings once and goes quiet, and the air turns a few degrees colder in a way the thermostat doesn't admit. I don't call it fear when I keep my eyes on the road and refuse to look in the mirror. I call it driving. Sometimes when I leave the car in the morning and the sun finally finds the windshield, I catch a faint smear on the inside of the glass, an arc that looks like a fingertip found the same place twice. I'll wipe it with my sleeve because only I can see it, and my sleeve comes away clean and cold. The pin and the photo strip are still in the bag in the console, where I tell myself they'll stay until I have the energy to explain. The bag fogs a little on rainy nights. If I listen hard enough, I can hear water find a seam in the door and count the drops. It never adds up to a number that makes sense. I never stopped for hitchhikers before that night, and I won't start now. That's the line I hold in my mouth when I turn the key. But when the rain hits the right way and the highway lights smear into one long ribbon and the roadside looks like a line of people with their heads down, I think about the word written on the glass from the wrong side. I don't know where home is for a girl who still finds the back seat of cars that don't stop. I only know that on nights when the clock reads 2:14 a.m. and then stutters like it can't make up its mind, my rear seat feels heavier, and for one heartbeat I taste creek water in the warm air. The last time it happened, I didn't look up. I kept my eyes on the road and pretended it was just the wipers. But when I got where I was going and shut the car off, the passenger door lock clicked open by itself. Like someone who'd ridden along politely all that way was letting herself out without making me watch. The first time I realized the desert could hold a grudge, I was 40 miles past the last town, and nothing in my mirror should have been familiar except it was. It was a black sedan with no reason to be there, hanging back just far enough that I could pretend it wasn't following me. The clock on my dash ticked to 12:53 a.m. and the center line flickered past like an IV drip. Out there, the dark looks empty until something decides to stay with you. I kept telling myself I didn't care about a random car on a random night, and the road kept making that hard to believe. I'm Andre, 35, based in Phoenix. I pick up freelance AV jobs, small concerts, conferences, anything that needs speakers and a guy who knows which cable not to yank. Most of my runs are desert highways, A60, I-10, and I-40 if the wind cooperates. I drive a 2014 Tacoma with 180,000 miles and a dash cam my dad gave me last Christmas because he thinks everything is solved by video. The bed had 2 subs ratchet strapped to keep them from kissing the tailgate, and a yellow strap creaked now and then like it needed attention. I had a thermos of burnt diner coffee, a pack of sunflower seeds, and the kind of playlist you put on when everything else gets too quiet. The stretch between Wickenburg and Quartzsite always feels like someone peeled the sky wider than usual. Even with the window up, I could smell dust and hot rubber, that late-night highway mix every Arizonan knows. I passed a sign for Salome that looked like it had been sunburned and forgot. The temp had dropped into the high 40s, which only matters when your hands have been wrapped around a steering wheel for hours. The black sedan behind me had been there since the turnoff by Aguila. No high beams. No lane games, just constant. I tried not to make it a thing. Sometimes you share the road with the same stranger for an hour and never think about it. But 20 minutes is one thing and 40 miles is another. Every time I changed lanes to pass a slow RV, the sedan slid through the same gaps. When I backed down to 65 for a minute to let a semi merge, it softened to match me. It didn't crowd me or drift close, it just stayed. I told myself it was a coincidence, that we were both aiming for the same all-night gas station near Ehrenberg. I'm not superstitious, but I'm not stupid either. At 1:17 a.m., a sliver of cell service came back, and I stared at the bar like it could make me braver. I thought about calling highway patrol just to put my voice in someone's log, but it felt dramatic. If you drive the desert enough, you learn you can psych yourself out with shadows. I dialed my brother instead, let it ring twice, then hung up because I didn't have a good opener besides, "Hey, look behind me." The sedan blinked its running lights exactly once, like it had hit a bump or like it was answering a question I hadn't asked out loud. I told myself I'd test it. I slowed way down and took exit 69, the kind of exit that leads to a convenience store that always looks closed, even when it is. The sign said gas food ice in a font that belongs to summer in the 90s. I used my signal out of habit. The sedan took the exit. It stayed back one car length farther than comfortable, the way polite people do when they tail you into a parking lot because they don't want to spook you, except that made it worse. I pulled under the canopy into the second bay. The sedan glided to the far edge of the lot, parked facing out, and didn't pull up to a pump. Under the canopy, the light felt clinical, like the kind they use in operating rooms. The credit card reader at my pump had a cracked plastic hood, and a strip of clear tape over the zip code keypad made the buttons gummy. I lifted the nozzle and the screen told me to prepay inside. The sedan's headlights clicked off. The windshield didn't reflect anything except the glare from the canopy. I couldn't see a headrest, a hat, or an elbow on a window. The tint was the legal kind, maybe a hair darker. The plate should have been a white Arizona with a purple mountain. The frame was black, dirty, and unreadable. Inside, the bell made the little ding that always reminds me of door chimes at my grandma's house. The place smelled like spilled diesel and lemon cleaner. Cooling fans whined behind the refrigerated cases, and a microwave spun with no sound. The clerk looked up before I reached the counter, like he'd been pretending not to watch the lot. Mid-50s, shaved head, faded navy hoodie with the store logo that had lost half its letters. The kind of guy who's comfortable at 1:30 a.m. because he's always here at 1:30 a.m. "I need to prepay 20 on 2, I said, and slid a card I knew they'd ask me to insert twice. I kept my voice normal, like this was just a routine stop on a routine night. Grounded is easier to fake when you're buying fuel. He rang me up, eyes flicking to a monitor that showed 4 camera angles, the lottery counter, the aisle with lug nuts and motor oil, the doors, and the lot. "You got a black sedan behind you?" he asked, like he was asking if I needed a receipt. "Yeah," I said, "there isn't a natural place to put the next sentence. It got off when I did." He nodded the way people nod when something they expected happens. He tapped the screen with a chewed fingernail and zoomed the lot camera. The sedan sat where I'd seen it, angled toward the exit like it had been tossed there by a lazy hand. "That thing's been packing people for weeks," he said. "Folks come in here white as a sheet. No one ever sees who's inside." I didn't like how simple he made it sound, like it was a baked-in feature of this place, like road tar or tumbleweeds. "Cops do anything?" I asked, because that's what you say next. He shrugged like he was disappointed in the universe, not just the sheriff's office. Deputy rolled through last week, walked up on it, light in the windows. Nobody home, he said, but cars don't park themselves. He looked at me for a beat longer than was friendly. You headed west, I'd fuel and go. Don't hang around letting something decide how close it wants to get. I slid the receipt into my pocket because it gave my hand a job. On the monitor, the sedan's headlights flickered once like eyes adjusting. Can you rewind it? I asked. Show me if it followed anybody else. The clerk tapped back through timestamps and thumbed a slider like he'd done it too many times. 2 hours earlier, a minivan coated in road dust, the driver yawning and a kid asleep with a tablet on their lap. The sedan, a dozen car lengths back, never used to pump, letting the van leave first and then gliding after. Half a day ago, a U-Haul with a couch tied badly in the back, a college kid with a hat buying sour gummies. The same sedan was in the far end spot, lights off, angled out, leaving 5 beats after the U-Haul pulled back onto the access road. It was as if the lot came with a prop car the store couldn't get rid of. I told myself there had to be a simple answer. Maybe some guy was messing with people for kicks. Maybe the clerk was telling me a story because nights are long. You got the plate? I asked, already knowing how that would go. He zoomed until the video turned into squares. The license field stayed a silver blur. He tapped the glass like the act could focus pixels. I've tried, he said. He swallowed, then added, almost like he didn't want to give the words too much space. No one ever seen a face. I took my change and walked back out under the canopy. The pump accepted the prepay like it was grateful to be included. The gas hissed down the line, and my fingers moved out of habit to twist the new cap until it clicked. The night felt heavier, like the desert had shifted 2 inches closer to the pavement. The sedan's windows held the canopy light like black mirrors. The no smoking sign rattled above the pump in a wind I couldn't feel. When I hung the nozzle, the sedan's running lights bloomed and died. My skin pulled tight like I'd walked into an air-conditioned room too fast. I got in the truck and locked the doors, even though locked is a suggestion at best against the person who wants in. I adjusted the mirror and tried to catch something besides reflection. The center of the sedan's windshield swallowed everything. It felt like looking down a hallway where the far end doesn't exist. I pulled to the exit and rolled through a yellowed stop sign. The sedan turned from its spot and fell in behind me so smoothly I didn't see the wheels move. Back on the highway, the white lines picked up again, a chorus I didn't want. I set the cruise to 72 because 11 over is how the unbothered drive there. The sedan matched it like we were tethered. Every few minutes I'd catch myself checking the mirror more than the road. That's how you put yourself into a ditch before the thing behind you even has to try. At 1:41 a.m. I decided to stop treating it like a ghost and treat it like a person. I changed lanes 3 times in a half mile, sloppy enough to be obvious. The sedan followed each move with the accuracy of a driving test. I feathered the brake for a second with my left foot like I had an itch. The sedan's headlights shrank, then grew, always the same polite distance. Whoever it was could outpatient me, which I hated. Past Vicksburg Road, the desert opened wider and the wind pushed from the right like a big, slow breath. A freight train moved in the distance with red dots for eyes. I don't know why I looked at the dash cam then. Maybe I needed proof that I wasn't inventing this. The little red wreck was solid. In theory, a camera can't be afraid. I told myself that later and didn't believe it. At 1:58 a.m., I dialed 911. I never do that lightly, but the clerk's weeks rattled around my head and wouldn't settle. The call connected to a calm voice that asked my mile marker and if I'd been drinking. I gave her the information, and when she asked me to describe the car, I said black sedan and felt ridiculous. She told me a trooper was 30 minutes away and to avoid stopping on the shoulder if I could help it. 30 minutes is a long time when the thing you need help from is already exactly where it wants to be. I passed a rest area sign, blue and bright, promising bathrooms and a table graphic. I thought about pulling in, letting the trooper meet me there. I thought about the pickup trucks you always see parked nosing in the far corner with people asleep under coats. The sedan pulsed its running lights once, like it knew my choices and was giving me a vote. The dash clock rolled to 2:02 a.m. and sat there half a second longer than necessary, like time itself was making room. At 2:09 a.m., the sedan tightened its following distance, not menacing, just a nudge. When I signaled left, it signaled left with the same rhythm, like our turn relays shared a nerve. My mouth went dry. I took the next exit that promised gas in 5 miles, even though I'd just filled up. I needed witnesses, or at least bright light, or maybe just another pair of eyes. The approach to the off-brand station looked like every desert approach, a gravel shoulder that can fool you into thinking it's paved, a sign with half the bulbs burned out, and a canopy that hums like a beehive. 2 big rigs were sleeping along the fence. I parked at pump 6 again without meaning to. The sedan eased to the far end of the lot and took the same exact angle from before. It wasn't random anymore, it was repetition. Inside, the night clerk was a woman in her 30s with purple hair pulled into a bun and a Cheez-It sweatshirt. Her eyes flicked to the lot cameras on instinct. 20 on 6, I said because ritual helps. I added before I could stop myself, that black sedan, do you see it? She didn't even glance at the door. Been around, she said, not bored, not surprised. Follows folks. When I walk out to mop, it feels like the air dips. She clicked my receipt loose and stapled it to itself for no reason that made sense. I don't walk up to it. I used to until I don't anymore. I asked if it had ever taken a pump. She shook her head once, a tidy no. I asked if anyone had seen who was driving. No one sees. Her voice went softer on those two words. It's like tint turned inside out. Back outside, I didn't pretend I had a better plan. I got back into my truck, locked the doors, and watched my own small world in the glass. The sedan's running lights lit once like a blink. In my mirror, for the first time, I saw movement in its darkness, like fabric shifting. It wasn't proof, it was a feeling with edges. When I pulled out, the sedan let two beat-up pickups pass in front of it as if it had manners. Then it curved onto the access road and took its place behind me again. My hands were steady now, not because I wasn't scared, but because fear gets bored of showing itself and just holds on tight. I took the ramp slow. Back on I-10, eastbound lanes stretched, clean and empty. Something about the fresh asphalt looked too new, like a rerun of a road segment you've already driven. At 2:14 a.m., a coyote scissored across the median and disappeared into brush. The sedan drifted half a car width right and then corrected like a person checking their phone. My dashcam timestamp ticked perfectly with the clock. I said out loud to no one, "I see you," and immediately felt stupid. The sedan didn't react, or maybe it did, and its reaction was the same silence I was staring into. Headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, sharp, blue-white, eating the road fast, highway patrol Charger. He passed me, slowed, and tucked in between me and the sedan. I breathed for the first time in too many minutes. The trooper lifted a hand into his rearview for a second, a small wave you give a fellow night person. His brake lights popped with a quick tap. The sedan behind him didn't fall back or drift left. It didn't do anything. For 3 seconds, it was gone. The space where it had been was just road. I don't mean it turned off, it didn't exist. On the stretch of highway directly behind the trooper's bumper where the sedan had been a breath ago, there was nothing. Like I had made up 40 miles, a gas station, 2 receipts, and a clerk with a memory. My heart did a weird, drop stomach kind of thing. The trooper hung with me for another mile, then moved ahead, no lights, no drama. When he went, the black sedan slid back into the space between us like a video unpaused. It was as if a frame had skipped and then corrected. I tasted metal and found my jaw clenched so hard my molars ached. The rest of the drive to Blythe felt shorter and longer at the same time. The sedan stayed, never tried to rush me, never dropped far, and never left. I pulled into the bright wash of the big Pilot at the state line because I wanted strangers, cameras, and movement. I parked under too much light and made it a point to see that many people were around me that night. A guy with a cowboy hat bought jerky and stared at his phone. A woman in a reflective vest microwaved a burrito and yawned like a human being. Normal is a smell if you stand in it long enough. I sat at a bolted-down table by the window and pretended to text while I watched the sedan in the lot. When I looked straight at it, it was there. When I glanced down at my phone and then back up, for half a second my eyes tried to show me an empty space, and then it would be there again. 2 teenage boys stood outside the bathroom comparing haircuts and didn't give the lot a second glance. The cashier handed me a blue pen to sign a receipt for a pack of gum I didn't want. The pen was heavy in a way that meant it was tied to the counter with fishing line once, and someone cut it. I wasn't going to sit there until sunrise. Hotels out here are weird at best and doors that open to the parking lot at worst. I got back in my truck. The dashcam's little red light glowed like a friend. I decided I'd take the frontage road for a few miles, then jump back on the interstate. The sedan did the same. The frontage road has those periodic dips where flash floods run. In one low spot, the water left a thin ribbon of darker pavement. My tires made that wet whisper for a second. The sedan's tires didn't, or if they did, I didn't hear it over my own blood in my ears. By the time I hit Quartzsite, I was done being interesting. I took the exit for a cheap motel that always has a vacancy because no one wants to be that tired in Quartzsite. I parked nose out under a camera dome and gave myself 5 minutes to sit and be stupid, staring at my hands. The sedan eased into a space 3 aisles over, directly under a dead light. No one got out. No interior dome flashed. I waited for another car to pass between us to prove this wasn't personal. A lifted Silverado did. When it cleared, the sedan was 2 spaces closer, angled a touch differently, like a chess piece that had been nudged when you looked away. I went inside and bought a room with a key card that stuck in the reader twice before finding itself. The night manager gave me a standard speech about ice machines and breakfast hours that didn't apply to me. I slept 5 hours badly. In the morning, under a sun that made everything honest again, I walked out expecting to feel stupid for the way my heart had behaved. The sedan wasn't in the lot. That should have helped. It didn't. Back in the truck, I pulled the dashcam card and scrubbed the files. On the highway, the sedan was there in the footage when I passed reflective signs and mile markers, but in two clips, both at the gas station exits, it was. I watched myself pull out, and the gap behind me stayed a plain piece of road, and then in the next clip it was tucked there again like it had always been. At 2:14 a.m., the timestamp stuttered for half a second and doubled a frame. I took a screenshot and stared at the numbers like a math problem with a trick. I didn't call the clerk back, though I thought about it. I didn't call the non-emergency number again to ask if a deputy had found anything at the rest area. Instead, I drove home in sensible daylight and told myself sleep would peel the weird off of me. I stopped at AutoZone for new wiper blades I should have bought 6 months ago. In the parking lot under the noon sun, I swapped them out like a person who fixes things. At home, I put the receipts from both stations on my counter without meaning to. They both listed the same store number at the top. I checked the addresses, different streets, different towns, same store number. My stomach did that small drop again. I told myself gas companies reuse numbers. I told myself clerks reuse stories. I told myself a lot of things that sounded like prayer. I still take that highway because that's the job. The black sedan doesn't show up every time. It hasn't tried to run me off the road or tap my bumper or do anything a person could charge a person for. It just stays until it doesn't. Sometimes, when I get off late and the desert is wide open, I'll pass a mirror of dark glass 50 yards back and feel the hair on my forearms lift like a weather report. I keep my eyes forward, count the markers, drink the bad coffee, and pretend I'm the kind of man who isn't keeping a little space on the right side of the mirror clear with my thumb. Last week I got an envelope from a toll-by-plate office in California, even though I hadn't been to California in months. Inside, there was a printed violation with my plate number blurred by dust and a grayscale photo of my tailgate. 2 car lengths behind, a black shape with no plate sat in the lane. The section for vehicle type was blank. Someone had written indeterminate in blue pen. The time stamp was 2:14 a.m., the same minute as the stutter on my dash cam. I don't have an account there. The notice didn't ask for money. It just said, "This is a courtesy image." I slipped it back into the envelope and filed it under nothing. On Saturday, running back from a gig in Yuma, I stopped at that first station again for water and a bathroom that smells like bleach and something that never leaves. The clerk with the shaved head wasn't there. A new kid rang me up and asked if I wanted a car wash. The lot camera angle had changed, higher, wider. I glanced out at the pumps because I didn't want to look like a man checking for a specific shadow. A black sedan slid past on the access road, unhurried, not looking for anyone, like a man out for a walk on a street he owns. Maybe it wasn't the same one. That's what I told myself until I sat in my truck and found a small rectangle stuck under my wiper like a parking warning. It wasn't a ticket, it was an advertisement card, the kind car dealers leave. Blackout tint same day, any make, any model in white letters across a black square. No address, no phone. Just a QR code that led nowhere when I scanned it and a smudge of road dust across the corner like a fingerprint. I didn't keep it. I threw it in the trash next to the pump, even though I wanted to fold it and put it in the glove box with the receipts I keep telling myself I'll throw out. I'm not asking for an explanation. I've been on the road enough to know we don't get those. I'm just saying if you're ever out there and the night feels clogged and something in your mirror has been exactly where you left it for too long, don't build a story around it. Don't try to test it. Don't convince yourself you'll feel better if you pull off and let it park under a dead light while you pretend to shop for water you don't need. Drive smart and don't give it more time than the road already does. I haven't seen the sedan outside my apartment and I never want to. But sometimes when I back into my spot at home and the glass storefront of the laundromat across the lot throws my taillights back at me, I look at the reflection instead of the street behind. The red glow in the glass shows my truck, the empty lane, and 2 dim level headlights hovering where there isn't a car. I put it in park without turning around. I don't check the street. The reflection is enough. The last time I did that, the headlights in the glass blinked once, like a person who knows you saw them and is content to wait. I used to think every road had to end somewhere you could point at on a map, but the night I crossed a bridge that didn't, I realized that isn't always true. It was the kind of fog that doesn't drift, it sits, like wet insulation packed tight against the mountain. My wipers scraped over the glass and smeared halos around the headlights of the few cars I passed, and each halo floated behind me like a memory that didn't belong to me. The dash clock slid to 1:43 a.m., and the temperature nudged down to 37 degrees, which is the number that makes fog feel like a thing with hands. I'm Daniel, 32, and I drive at dumb hours for work. I do field service for a company that leases medical equipment, carts and monitors and portable x-ray units that never break at noon, but always die at 11 p.m. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. and a lot of my route snaked through Pisgah National Forest in the blue ridge at hours when the deer on the ramps. I keep a tire plug kit under the seat, a roadside triangle I've never used, and a paper state map folded the wrong way because it's older than my phone. The car is a 2013 Accord with a fog light on the passenger side that comes and goes like a mood. That night I was returning from a tiny hospital in a town that closes everything but the Waffle House at 9. I took the eastbound state highway I always take back to I-40, the one that crawls up through a pass and then drops in a spiral of truck lanes and warning signs. The fog thickened right after the last exit with any lights at all, and by the time my high beams made a wall instead of a road, I throttled back to 38 and let the engine hum do the thinking. The radio was off. The heater fan made a steady lawnmower purr at setting 2. I counted reflectors as a way to keep my eyes open. Somewhere past the second runaway truck ramp, the grade leveled and opened onto a straight section I didn't remember. At first I thought it was just the fog making the slope feel flat. Then I heard the thump of expansion joints underneath me, evenly spaced like the drum beat of a long bridge. The guardrail on my right changed too, no longer wood posts and steel, but tall concrete with a white stained line halfway up like water had kissed it over and over. The fog swallowed whatever the bridge crossed. It could have been a ravine or a river or nothing at all. I've lived here my whole life and driven that pass since I was 19. There isn't a long bridge on that stretch. There are curves and rock faces with chain mesh and a short viaduct that lifts you over a creek, but nothing like this. My GPS blue dot stopped sliding and just pulsed. The label under it said NC-74 East and then no data, like the map had run out of lines. The trip odometer I'd reset after the hospital drifted between 12.9 and 13 and refused to roll over. I told myself the state must have done a project I hadn't kept up with, a new viaduct, a detour in place while they fix a landslide, something with a plan and a press release. The fog made the world feel different enough that any change would feel invisible. I checked the time because that's what you do when you tell yourself it's fine. It was 1:51. My fingers had that slightly numb feeling you get when you've been clenching a wheel without noticing. Expansion joints have a cadence. These had a rhythm so regular it started to bother me. Thump, breath, each one the same distance apart no matter how fast or slow I drifted. The white dashes down the center line stayed perfect, no chips, no patches like the paint never met a snowplow. There were no reflectors stuck on the concrete, no weeds growing up through cracks at the edge, just a clean ribbon disappearing into gray. I passed a green mile marker that read 0.4, and then a minute later, another that read 0.4 in the exact same font with a spot of rust in the same place. At 1:57 a.m. I tapped the brakes because tapping the brakes makes you feel like you're choosing things. No red reflected off anything in front of me. No cat's eye reflectors woke up. I realized I hadn't seen a single oncoming headlight since the bridge began. If this was a detour, where were the cones? Where was the sign telling me the name of the river, the creek, the gorge, anything? My phone showed one bar, then none, then busy little dots next to the map that never turned into anything. I got the spinning wheel. That means it wants to help but can't. I hit the voice button because talking to a robot felt better than being supervised by silence. Directions home, I said. The voice replied after a lag that felt a breath too long. Continue on the current road for 1 mile. The words sounded normal, but the way she drew out 1 made the hair on my forearms lift under the jacket. I passed another mile marker, 0.4 again. The fog banked and rolled like slow smoke in my headlights. The left-hand barrier had a stain at ankle height that looked like someone had spilled coffee, and it ran along the concrete in the same weird wave again and again. I told myself I was noticing patterns because I was looking for them. That didn't help. I rolled the window down an inch and got a face full of cold, wet air with a smell like wet rock and a faint sweetness that reminded me of creosote after a summer rain. I don't spook easily in a car with a full tank and a functioning engine, but there are moments where your brain shifts from this is strange to something is wrong. Mine shifted when the clock ticked to 2:04 a.m. and then the seconds stopped moving. I watched the colon blink between the numbers with no counting sound to follow it. The odometer dropped back to 12.9 and then to 12.8 like it was telling me a secret backwards. I said my name out loud, not because I thought it would matter to the road, but because hearing it anchored me to the driver's seat. The first call box appeared on the right like a polite little house on a post. Emergency phone 4 in blue letters. The hood over the old speaker was beaded with water that looked like sweat on a forehead. I expected the next one to say 5 or 3, but the next one said 4 again, with the same little dent in the edge of the hood like someone had bumped it with a bumper at 6 miles an hour. I wasn't braking now to test things. I was braking because my chest felt tight. The engine idled smoother than it had all week, not a single hiccup to blame. At 2:08 a.m., I called 911 because a person talking back to me from any office anywhere would be proof of a world that still had edges. The call connected on the second ring to a voice that sounded like comfort wrapped in fluorescent lighting. She asked my location, and I told her the highway and the pass and the mile marker, and I said, "I'm on a bridge that shouldn't be here," which sounded insane to me even as I said it. She asked if there had been an accident, and I said no, and she asked if I was injured, and I said no again, and then she said, "Sir, if you are at mile marker 183, there is no bridge there." I told her the marker said 0.4 and had said it 3 times, and she asked me to hold while she checked with dispatch to see if there was a detour in place. When she put me on hold, the music wasn't music. It was a thin hiss with something talking under it, not words exactly, but syllables shaped like words. I stared at the speaker in the door like it could answer the question I didn't know to ask. My mirror showed nothing behind me but fog sewn tight. I hung up, which isn't like me, and I hated myself a little for that. The next sign I saw was a yellow diamond with a slanted black arrow, the kind that warns you of a curve, but the arrow kept spiraling like someone had dragged a finger through wet paint and didn't stop when they reached the edge. I pressed the hazard button without taking my eyes off the road and heard the soft tick under the steering column, comforting in its surety. The red flash from the rear windows lit the fog like a heartbeat. In the side window, a line of condensation formed, as if a fingertip had drawn the outline of the hazard triangle from the inside. I tried to turn around because the thought of more straight, more nothing was worse than the thought of breaking a rule on a bridge. I checked the right barrier for an emergency bay, a turnout, a shoulder wider than a foot, anything. There was none. I checked the left for the little crosshatch where a U-turn might be possible for maintenance vehicles. There was none. I slowed to 15 until my tires made that little whine that says you're about to be rear-ended by a night person doing 80. No headlights grew in the mirror. I sped back up because stopping in the middle of a road that may or may not be a road is how you end up as a paragraph in a newspaper story that starts with "authorities are unsure." The radio came on by itself to NOAA weather, a robot voice listing counties and saying fog advisory every 20 seconds. The same 3 counties rotated: Yancey, Madison, Buncombe. Every third mention, the voice stuttered on the word bun and said it again like a skip in a CD. At 2:14 a.m., the GPS made the little ping it makes when it finally knows where you are. I felt a stupid, childish relief, like I'd found a nightlight chain in a dark room. The blue dot pulsed in the exact center of the same flat beige that had been there before. Under it in gray text it said recenter, and an address number that wasn't an address at all, just 0 again and again, a line of zeros that pushed the rest of the interface off the screen. I tried to zoom out. The gesture worked on nothing. I passed a smear of dark on the right barrier that looked like streaked graffiti. 30 seconds later, there it was again, down to the way the paint had feathered where a roller ran out at the end of a stroke. I told myself a maintenance crew could stamp out identical sections of wall. It's easier to repeat a pattern than invent. The smell in the car changed to something like damp rope and cold concrete. My heater fan lowered itself from 2 to 1 without my hand moving the slider. The sound made me feel like the car had decided we should whisper. I did the dumbest reasonable thing. I decided to throw on my hazard triangle, just to have a job that meant I was a person in a normal place. I eased to a stop, flashers ticking, tires thumping once more over a joint and settling. I put it in park and opened the door to fog that felt like walking into a clouded shower, and the hiss of damp air filled my ears. The bridge had no sound but the popping of the cooling exhaust and the far, bare hum of a world below I couldn't see. Standing there, it was clear how tall the barrier was, chest high on me at 5'10", and how clean. The top edge was rounded smooth. The water beads on it lined up like tiny pearls. I set the triangle down behind the car, and the fog swallowed it 3 steps out like a stage magic trick. It lit in pools in red, a little heartbeat, and then, "This part isn't possible." It was in front of my hood, blinking the same way. I blinked, and it was behind me again, fainter now, like distance had stretched without me taking a step. I got back in the car because outside wasn't better. The door thunk sounded muted, like it had pillows pressed against it. My seat was cold where my back had been warm. I turned the key hard out of habit even though the engine was already on and the car coughed in mechanical confusion. The dashcam's little red light glowed, a witness that wasn't going to testify to anyone who mattered. The clock still read 2:14. The second colon blinked like it was trying to catch my eye. I drove, no more stopping, no more testing. The human in me wanted an end, any end, an exit sign, a curve, a piece of trash that wasn't the same under-football stadium-light bridge version of trash I'd already seen. I counted expansion joints, 50 sets, then 100, then I lost count. My fingers started that ache you get when you grip the wheel too high for too long. I dropped them to the bottom and let the top weight of the wheel do the work for a mile that didn't exist. I saw tail lights ahead and almost cried. 2 dim red eyes grew from the fog like a pair of pilot lights in an old furnace. At first it was like catching a friend's porch light when you turn onto their street. Then it stayed the same distance away no matter how I sped up. The brake lights never brightened, and I didn't see the hint of a license plate light or trunk seen, just red floating dots at my height. When I tapped my high beams, they winked once and came back in the exact same place. The terrible thought hit me like a fist to the stomach. I was following myself. I didn't pull up close to check because I didn't know what I'd do if I saw the exact shape of my bumper or my dented license plate frame from that time. I backed into a yellow pole too close at a hardware store. I backed off slower until the red dots faded the way taillights do when fog eats light instead of distance. My breathing sounded too loud, the way you hear your own jaw click in elevators. I told the wheel okay out loud, like I was making a deal with something with rules. If there had been a shoulder wide enough to stop, I might have slept right there. The bridge didn't give me that out. It gave me another mile marker, 0.4 on the right, and another emergency phone, 4 on the left, which isn't how the numbering should work. It gave me a section of wall where 3 bolts lined up just under the capstone with a rust bleed above the middle one, and then it gave me that exact bleeding rust again. I felt for the first time like the car and I were the loop, not the bridge. That this wasn't something I was on, it was something I was doing. At 2:27 a.m., my phone made a noise like a voicemail notice from an old flip phone, an alert I haven't heard in years. The screen lit where it sat in the cup holder with a call in progress I had replaced. The contact showed as MY number. When I lifted it, my own voice filled the car from the speaker, not live, but a half second behind, like a lag on a video call. If you are at mile marker 183, there is no bridge there, my voice said in the same cadence the dispatcher had used. I ended the call so hard my thumb hurt. I thought about turning the car around until logic felt like a quaint thing to admire from afar. I thought about climbing the barrier, but I didn't want to put my hands on the concrete. The idea of my skin touching it made my stomach roll. I did the only normal thing left. I focused on the tiny sliver of road I could control, the next 30 feet, and kept going. The fog thinned once, then thickened like a lung drawing shallow breaths. At 2:34 a.m., the expansion joint stopped. The sound peeled away, and my tires thumped onto old, rough asphalt that hummed in a way I know too well. The guardrail on the right turned back from steel to wood. The left returned to the rock face with mesh and graffiti that changed with baseball seasons. The road curved where it always curves, with that familiar little off-camber quirk you either respect or you don't. The sky was still a sealed box, but my headlights found trees, and trees found my eyes back. I didn't explode with relief. It came in a thin trickle, like a drip from a faucet someone forgot to turn all the way. The clock moved to 2:35. The GPS admitted the road existed again and told me to take the exit I always take. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station at the bottom of the mountain with the kind of fluorescent lighting that turns people gray, and bought a water I didn't want and stood there under the buzzing like God's refrigerator and looked at the cashier until he looked up. I said, "Does that pass have a long bridge on it now?" He said, "Nope," without thinking. He asked if I needed a receipt. I said no, because receipts mean you were somewhere, and I wasn't in the mood to prove anything. At home at 3:12 a.m., my apartment felt like a place I recognized. I shut the bathroom door and heard the fan change tone as it warmed up, and that tiny sound made my shoulders drop an inch. I took the dashcam card out before I could talk myself to sleep. In the quiet of my kitchen, with the light over the sink too bright for my eyes, I scrubbed through the timeline. The hour where the bridge should have been was there, but every minute-long segment was the same 60 seconds of footage saved over and over. In it, my headlights lit a smooth concrete barrier, a mile marker that read 0.4 and a damp, reflective road, and then it looped. On the bottom of each clip, the time stamp read 2:14 a.m., 2:14 a.m., and 2:14 a.m., as if the camera's idea of time had been pinned. I didn't tell anyone the next day because I drove on a bridge that never ended doesn't make you sound stable. I told myself it was exhaustion, that fog plays tricks, that if I write it down a month from now it'll make a different kind of sense. For a week, I avoided the pass by taking a longer route that added 20 minutes and a handful of stoplights I hate. It felt like cheating on a test I never asked to take. Next time work sent me that way, it was daylight. The mountains stood up in their normal greens and browns like someone had put them back while I wasn't looking. At the top of the pass there was no bridge, just a short viaduct I always remembered, and the old curve with the rock wall that holds a shadow even at 2 in the afternoon. I slowed to read the mile markers, even though that's a weird thing to do. They read like they should: 183, 182, 181. No 0.4, no blue call boxes on posts, nothing new. Back at the office, I pulled the paper map from the glove box and spread it open on the break room table like I was laying out a clue in a mystery no one else had signed up to participate in. The highway strip was lines and numbers that have existed longer than me. Between the two exits I know like the back of my hand. Some past owner of the map had traced a circle in pencil at the pass and pressed hard enough to emboss a faint 0 into the layers of paper. The pencil dust left a gray smear on my thumb that wouldn't rub off for the rest of the day. When I sat in the car after work and turned the key, the clock flashed 2:14, like the battery had been disconnected for a second, even though it hadn't. It corrected itself to 5:06 p.m. after a heartbeat, but the flash made me stare at the display longer than anyone should stare at a cheap car clock. I drove home the long way, and the long way felt like cheating again. But I did it anyway because cheating felt better than the idea of a thing that wanted me back the way a bad habit does. Now when I drive at night, sometimes my GPS will lose its mind in familiar spots and park the blue dot on a patch of nothing with the word recenter, in a way that makes me feel like I never quite did. Sometimes, even on flat ground with no bridges in sight, my expansion joint rhythm will come back, thump, breath, and I'll turn the radio up and pretend it's a song. On those nights, I don't check the dash cam later. The world already has the version where it's the same minute over and over. I don't need to add to it. I haven't heard the 911 hold music again, and I don't want to. The one time I caved and searched the pass on local forums, I found an old thread about an accident up there at night a few winters ago. A truck into a barrier in heavy fog. The replies were what you expect, thoughts and prayers, people complaining about lighting, and someone saying it needs a new viaduct. Nothing about a bridge that shows up only when the fog presses the world thin. Still, when I read it, I found myself listening for the faint sound of a call box phone you're not supposed to touch. This is the part where I should tell you I don't take that road anymore. It would make a good ending. But people still need machines fixed at dumb hours, and I still need a paycheck, and there are only so many ways through a mountain. I take it slower. I count fewer things. I don't say my name out loud. I don't answer my phone if it says I'm calling. Last week I was cleaning out the back seat because a bottle of water had leaked and the carpet smelled like a gym bag. Tucked between the seat and the door, where loose coins and French fries go to die, I found a thin strip of reflective tape with the number 4 printed on it in blue. The back was still sticky, like it had been peeled clean and pressed against something. The front held a faint smear of white grit in a line, the way a concrete edge would scuff a sticker if you brushed it with the same sleeve at the same height over and over. I dropped it into the glove box and shut it like closing a mouth. The fog rolled through town the other night in the way it does, a low, moving ceiling over the river that slides up into neighborhoods and turns streetlights into fuzzy orbs. I sat in my car before a graveyard shift call and watched the way the light hit the hood. The heater fan hummed steady on 2. The timing belt whined a note I've been meaning to get checked. My clock clicked from 2:13 to 2:14 and then stayed there a hair too long, like it had to take a breath before it was willing to move on. I put the car in drive, and for one heartbeat that felt like an hour, the wheel hummed the way it does over a long, clean seeming concrete. That's when I understood I hadn't left it behind on that pass at all. It had learned my rhythm and kept the peace. I looked down at the GPS, and the blue dot sat on a patch of gray that had no name, and the button under it asked me to recenter, like the road was politely offering me a choice I didn't make. I still haven't taken the sticker out of the glove box. I don't want to stick it to anything and find out what it's supposed to be stuck to. And if you ever find yourself on a mountain at night and hear the hiss of a fog that doesn't move and the joints of a bridge you don't remember lining up under you in a pattern that feels too even, don't try to name the river you're crossing. Don't count the mile markers. Don't call the number that shows up as yours. Drive. Keep driving. Because when the minute on your clock stutters and the map politely asks if you want to recenter, there's only one answer that makes sense, and it's not the kind you say out loud. The night I learned the highway can look back at you was a Monday, a little after 2 in the morning, when a driver rolled down his window and handed me a photo of myself, taken from my side of the glass from where I was standing right then. The picture still felt warm. I could smell ink through the narrow gap between our worlds. My thumb left a faint half-moon on the white border because I didn't know what else to hold on to. He didn't say anything. He just slid the photo into the drawer the way you slide bills and coins, like proof and payment were the same thing out there. I'm Alicia, 30, and I work nights in a toll booth on a quiet stretch of our state turnpike that crosses nothing but pine and swamp for miles. My shift runs from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I do everything the training manual tells you keeps you awake. Coffee in a thermos, playlists I made for the hours when the road hums you into thinking you're alone, and a cheap floor heater by my boots that clicks like it's swallowing. The booth is a narrow glass room with bullet-resistant panels, a metal drawer for cash that slides out to the lane, an intercom you have to press hard with your thumb to talk over truck engines, and a red-green light you control with a switch. There's a row of cameras that stare down from the canopy like big flies, and a little monitor at my knee that cycles through their angles. I log plates when the reader throws errors, count my drawer, and wave through easy-pass drivers who barely tap their brakes. The stretch of road I work is the kind people only use because they have to, an alternate route around the county that saves 20 minutes if you know it's there. On good nights, raccoons shuffle along the fence and act like they're paying cars too. On bad nights, the fog sits low and makes the lane markings feel like paper, and the radio crackles with far-off voices that use mile markers instead of town names. Troopers like to park in the median a half-mile down and watch for drunks who hit the cones. There's one other booth across from me at this plaza, but for budget reasons, it's closed most nights. The green arrow over it stays black. The joke is I'm the cashier of a store with one customer every 5 minutes until 2, and then fewer than that. Last week started like any week. The air had that early spring bite where you can smell wet dirt and a colder sky above it. I threw my vest over my hoodie, did the key dance on the lock, and waited for the cage to wind up. The booth always smells like mild cleaner and money, a nickel smell that gets into your hair if you forget to wash it out before bed. I stacked rolls of quarters in the drawer and put the counterfeit pen on top, like anyone pays with $100 bills out there. The red-green light on the panel flicked to green when I flipped it. The heater clicked on with a breath and made the toes of my boots sting before they warmed. The first sign that the night would be wrong came at 12:41 a.m. when the transponder reader beeped like a car was inside the halo, but there was no one in the lane yet. I glanced at the monitor and saw the empty road stretching back to the last cone, orange in the overhead glare. I toggled the intercom by habit and said, "Go ahead," like I say when someone's halfway through the zone and confused about cache versus transponder. The only answer was wind hitting the canopy. I chalked it up to a glitch. The reader's finicky and hates cold, damp air. At 1:09, a black SUV rolled up, and the guy inside forgot how the drawer worked and tried to hand me a debit card through the bulletproof glass. I slid the drawer out and figured it out, and he handed me exact cash, $1, 75 in quarters and dimes. People who use this road a lot always have the exact change. He kept his head down the whole time, cap low, and all I saw was stubble and hands. When I said, "Have a good night," the intercom echoed it back half a second later, the same words in a flat version of my voice, like the speaker had stuck and coughed it up. That happens sometimes too. I told myself I was noticing the wrong things. Between cars is when you hear the rest of the world. The floor heater clicks, a cricket tries out a bad idea by the fence even in the cold, and the building lights buzz in that fluorescent way that always seems louder if you're trying to listen for something else. At 1:27, my supervisor called to say she'd be late in the morning for shift change and to lock up the deposit bag if I had to leave before she got there. Her voice is always too cheerful at night, like she's holding a smile for a camera you can't see. I looked out through the reflective glass at my own face, the kind that looks a year older under fluorescent light. Around 1:39, I started seeing shadows where there weren't things. That sounds dramatic. It wasn't full of ghosts. It was just that at the edge of my vision, movement would slip into frame by the lane, and when I turned my head, the space would be the same flat concrete in a cone with a scuffed stripe where somebody sometime had dragged it. The monitor lagged a beat, like my hand moved before the screen. A truck horn blew way down the road, the long wave that isn't angry, just tired. I took a sip of coffee and tasted the metal from the thermos lid. At 1:52, the sedan we keep on hearing about slid into the spot in my lane where the crossover marks are. The car that looks like every car and none of them. Grayish, mid-size, windows just clean enough to pass inspection, no bumper stickers to hold on to. It didn't come to the window. It stopped 6 feet past the line, the driver's side even with my drawer, but not close enough to take anything. The engine stayed on. The wipers were slow and dry, working out of habit. I pressed the intercom thumb hard and said, "You're good, come up," and tried to sound like I was in charge of something. The car slid forward like it had been told in a different voice. When the window came down, the driver's face was a reflection, mine and the booth and the overhead lights smudged into a shape. The hand that extended into the drawer was a blur of sleeve in the Ranger green you see at hardware stores. No cash, no ticket, just a photo with a white border, square, like the kind my grandma kept on her fridge when I was a kid. The image was me from a left side angle you can't get from the lane because the wall is there. My head bent over the monitor and one hand near my heater's switch, my nail exactly where it was as I looked down at it. I looked up at the driver, but you know how glass and light can turn a face into a problem you can't solve. He didn't say a word. He lifted his hand in a small wave. The window went up, and he rolled through like we'd done the ordinary thing. More cars came too, then 3 normal ones with people who looked tired or blank or relieved to be done with a shift. One paid with ones that smelled like fryer grease. One had a yellow lab poking its head into the space between us, fogging my glass with dog breath I wanted to bottle and sell as an antidote to the other kind of breath. Between them, the drawer stuck halfway and I had to wiggle it, and the intercom coughed my voice back at me again, like a parrot that only knows one phrase. I tucked the photo in the slot by the register where I keep weird receipts and forgot about it for 5 minutes, like you forget a splinter that hasn't started to hurt yet. At 2:06, the same sedan rolled up again. If it wasn't the same, it was the kind of twin that makes you mad because why duplicate a thing that already exists? The window went down before I pushed the intercom. The hand put another square inside the drawer. This one had me looking up at the canopy, my mouth open with a word I hadn't said yet. Every piece of dust on the inside of my glass on that pane was there in the picture, same dots, same smear where I'd cleaned in a circle with the hem of my sleeve. My mouth made the shape of no, and then I said it for real because my body wants to match a picture if you show me one that looks like me. I called the supervisor line that goes to the little office at the main building, where someone sometimes sits and watches the same cameras and fills out the same forms and eats the same vending machine chips. It rang and rang. No answer. I called Tower Dispatch for the Turnpike Authority, different room, other end of the plaza, different smell of coffee. A man answered, his voice doing that fast, calm thing that makes worse things sound like they can be solved by a binder. I said my name and lane and that someone had just handed me photos of me taken in my booth. There's no line in the script for that. He asked if the driver had threatened me. I said no. He asked if I could describe the driver. I said no and felt stupid and small because what kind of worker can't describe the only customer who mattered tonight? He said he'd call a trooper to swing by, like a favor, like a routine. At 2:10, the monitor at my knee went black, then rolled back through the angles. Lane 3, my lane, empty. Lane 2, closed and dark. The overhead of the approach, flat road cones. A wrapper stuck in the seam of the concrete, flipping over itself when a low breeze got bored. The fourth camera is supposed to show my window from a high angle so you can see if anyone tries to reach through or toss a drink in your face. It showed my window, but the angle felt wrong. I could see the top of my head and the slope of my shoulder like I was being watched from the corner where the glass meets the metal frame. There's no camera there. I touched the frame like touching it could find a seam where a lens might hide. The metal felt cold and tacky, like someone had handled it with gloves and then cleaned it with too much cleaner. At 2:14 a.m., the equal sign on my clock blinked like it always does, but my eyes stuck to it because that is the minute stories love. The lane stayed empty. The drawer slid halfway out by itself and bumped my thigh. I pulled it back gently. When it was flush again, it bounced against my palm, not hard, just enough to tell me it wasn't done. I slid it out. Another photo. My hair from behind is a dark line that makes a question mark over my shoulder. A shoulder that looked tense. Something in the reflection behind me that felt like it should be a person if I stared hard enough at the grain, but wasn't. The time stamped at the bottom wasn't a real time stamp, just a pen scratch 2:14 in numbers that I would swear looked like my own writing from when I take plate notes. I pressed the panic pedal the way you press a memory, not hard enough to sound an alarm that brings headlights and questions, just enough to know I could. I told myself there were 100 explanation paths I could walk down. The Turnpike has cameras and printers that spit out stills when readers fail. Maybe someone in the office was testing a new system and I wasn't looped in. Maybe this was a terrible prank and I was the last person to get the joke. The problem with those paths is they don't explain how somebody standing in a car lane took a photo from a few inches off my left elbow. The trooper arrived at 2:21. I saw his Charger roll up in my approach camera, that unmistakable nose and slight glitter to the paint from the State Fleet wash. He parked where he wasn't a hazard and walked the last few steps like he'd been born into boots. His hand rested near his light, not his gun, because I looked like paperwork, not a fight. I slid the drawer out and put the photo in it because I wanted something to talk about besides my heartbeat. He bent, looked at it, then looked up at me. "Someone handed you this," he asked, not unkind, just making sure this wouldn't read crazy when he had to tell it again. I nodded. He scanned the lane with his light, and the concrete caught his beam and threw it back in flat white. He stepped to the side and looked along the seam where my glass meets the frame like he was checking for prime marks. "You alone at this plaza?" he asked, and I told him yes, nights since January. He took the photo out of the drawer and flipped it over like there might be a message on the back. It was just paperback. He looked at my monitor when the angle cycled to the one that showed my window from that too-close corner. "Is that camera new?" he asked. "No," I said, because it wasn't a lie. The number of cameras was the same as yesterday. His radio chirped and asked for his location. He set the photo back in my drawer like he didn't want to take parts of my night with him and said he'd sit in the median for a bit if I was spooked. He used the word spooked, not concerned. Felt honest. For 8 minutes the road behaved. A minivan with those little stick figure family decals paid exact change with nickels like they were cleaning out a forgotten cup holder. The semi rolled through slowly with a driver who waved at me even though he didn't need anything from me, one hand up, the quiet solidarity of people who work at dumb hours. The trooper's taillights glowed faintly under the break in the trees like eyes that say, "I'm here, go ahead." I breathed the way you forget to until you remember your body can. Around 2:33 I stacked the weird photos by the register because I didn't want them in sight, but I also didn't want them in my bag taking them home. It would bring the night into my apartment the way glitter follows you from a craft table. When I slid the stack onto the smooth spot of formica worn down by elbows, something caught on the drawer rail. I reached into the slot with my fingertips and touched the edge of paper taped under the metal. It gave in that slow way paper does when tape is old. I pulled it free. A third photo. Me leaning toward the intercom, my mouth open like I'm about to say, "You're good." A smudge on the glass at the exact height of a lower lip pressed there. It wasn't mine. I told myself not to fall apart over a picture that could have been faked for $10 at a thrift store if a person wanted to make a point. Then a box truck rolled up with a teen driver who had a voice a shade higher than a man's and eyes that were too awake. He paid cash with hands that fumbled and asked, "Do you ever get lonely out here?" The way young men think, banter lives in the same room as compliments. I said less lonely than stuck, because it's what I say, and he laughed in a way that didn't belong to the minute we were standing in. He rolled on. In the space he left, the drawer slid out just enough to catch the edge of my vest. Another photo waited there, still wet in the middle like it had been spit out from warm plastic. The angle wasn't impossible this time. It was just a fraction too low, like a child holding a camera. At 2:41, the intercom crackled and stopped on its own, like someone on the other end had pushed the button without speaking. The tiny green light that tells you the mic is live flicked and held. I heard wind, then something like breath, then my own voice saying, "Go ahead," from a minute earlier. It played twice, then went silent. I pressed the thumb switch and said, "If you need help, pull up," and immediately hated myself for offering any version of the word help to a thing I didn't understand. Nothing moved in the lane. The green turned the glass above my head into a softish neon that sucks color out of your face. At 2:47, I did the thing the manual says not to do unless there's debris in the lane. I stepped out. The walkway between booths is a narrow catwalk of concrete with a short rail and 2 inches of lip between you and a lane where people drive like the world is only theirs. I kept one hand on my vest, like a child grabbing a coat you can't lose, and let the other trail along the cold rail. The air outside has its own sound at night. It slides around the booths and gets thinner near the far edge. I looked back at my booth from just left of it. I wanted to see what it looks like to the camera that doesn't exist. The reflection in my own glass showed me in the lane, and my heaters glow like a tiny animal in a crate. Something moved in that same reflection behind me to the left, like a hand raising to touch the glass. When I turned, nothing was there. The hair from my ponytail stuck to my neck like it had been touched with a wet finger. I went back inside and turned the lock hard enough to feel it in my wrist. I told myself to ride the rest of the shift out with my brain on low, like an appliance you keep plugged in but never turn on high. The night got thin, the way it does after 2 when the real drunks are already home and the early workers haven't left. I kept checking the trooper's glow beyond the trees, and it stayed where it should, a distant porch light. I waited for the intercom to cough me up to myself again, and it didn't. The heater kicked and breathed, and the click stopped bothering me, because better a noise you know than a silence you don't. At 3:03, I made a decision I'll probably second-guess for years. I took the photos and put them under the counter beside the spare rolls of quarters, the way you tuck a note under a mat, like hiding it might change the world where it happened. When I slid the quarter sleeves, my fingers found a pack held together with a brittle loop of receipt tape. More photos. The ones on the bottom were older, edges furred a little like they'd been moved and moved again. One showed a girl in my booth who wasn't me, long hair down, thicker eyeliner than I wear, a tattoo peeking under her sleeve, and my brain did a quick stupid thing where it tried to make her me anyway by shifting details around. On the back, in the same pen scratches on mine, was a time, 2:14, no date, just a minute everyone knows. The trooper left at 3:11, his taillights lifting, vanishing as quick as the small comfort they provided. A pickup rolled through with 2 guys in neon-striped work jackets and a dog's head sticking between them like a referee who had given up. Normal came back for 3 cars, and then a red sedan with fogged windows eased up, and the window slid down 2 inches, just enough to push air the temperature of a basement into my booth. A woman's hand, short nails, faint scar on the thumb, pushed a photo through the drawer. Me again. This time my eyes weren't looking anywhere. They were closed. In the photo, a fingertip pressed to the glass on my side. The pad fit my lip. I must have done the math out loud because I heard my own voice say no into the intercom even though I hadn't pressed the button. I didn't take the photos home that morning. I locked my drawer, counted my deposit, and left everything in the slot for my supervisor like a person who follows rules because rules keep lights on. She came in late like she said and didn't mention them when I handed off. At 3 in the afternoon, when I should have been asleep, I lay on my couch under a cheap throw and watched the inside of my eyelids try to play the night back. I heard the intercom pick up breath that wasn't mine in my own living room. I told myself I was inventing. I told myself that so hard it sounded like lying. The next night I brought a fresh set of blades for the wipers on the booth's outside panes, even though I'd have to ask maintenance to install them and they'd roll their eyes because that's not my job. When I unlocked the door to the booth, a photo lay half under it, like a piece of mail a lazy carrier couldn't bother to push all the way through. It wasn't me inside my booth. It was me outside in the orange vest under the canopy, one hand on the rail. The shot was from above my left shoulder. There is nothing above my left shoulder except light and the underside of a bird nest that swallows bugs in summer. The back was blank. I tried to make a rule for myself because rules feel like armor. I told myself I would work through to the end of the week and then ask for a transfer to daytime lanes on the busier plaza closer to town. I told myself I wouldn't be alone again. At 2:12 a.m., I slid the drawer to take cash from a guy who counted exactly $1.75 into his palm like he'd practiced, and when I pulled it back, there was a photo taped to the bottom with clear tape so thin it vanished. It was me leaning forward with my palm up. In the bottom corner in that pen scratch was 2:14. I let it sit there like a trap I could see. When 2:14 clicked, the intercom light came on with no hand on the switch. The line was open. The sound of the road was in my ear without the glass. For a second, I thought I heard a radio from inside a car, a song from when I was in middle school that people still put on playlists to feel like their life had spots they can return to. The drawer slid against my thigh gently. I pulled it open an inch because I didn't want to give whatever wanted me more than an inch. The photo lay there, face down. I turned it over. It was a picture of my booth at 2:14 from a few feet behind me, my fingers hovering over the panicked pedal I hadn't pressed. My hand looked like a hand that would press it next. When the intercom spoke, it did it in my voice with the half-breath before a sentence and said softly, "Go ahead." I didn't press the pedal, I didn't answer. I let the light go dark. I let a car roll through and pretended it needed nothing from me but a lift of my chin. By 3, the night had decided to be quiet again. I stacked the photos in the drawer with the receipt tape bundle and told myself I had survived something even if I didn't know what you call it. I still work in the booth because rent is rent, and the day shift went to a guy with more seniority and a bigger family. The trooper still sits in the median sometimes. Sometimes he waves. I wave back. Most nights are only boring. But when the wind comes down from the pines in that way that sounds like whispering with a mouth full of water, the intercom pops without a thumb on it, and the drawer pushes my leg very gently, like a person asking for a favor. I've learned not to look at the monitor when the high angle cycles. The urge to see myself from the place no camera should be is like a sore tooth. Last Thursday, a man in a pickup with a dented tailgate and a dog bed in the back rolled up and handed me a folded piece of paper. I didn't want to take it, but there's only so much refusing you can do to a person paying for the road they're on. It was a printout of a missing persons poster from our county site from last year. Someone who worked nights at another Plaza 2 exits down who didn't show up to relieve her coworker. The photo on the poster was of the same girl whose picture I found in the taped bundle. I folded the paper and slid it under my log sheet without thinking. The man didn't look me in the eye when he took his change. He drove off slowly, like he was deciding whether to say something, and then didn't. A week later, I did what you do when something claws at you. I Googled at my kitchen counter with the light over the stove because it's the only one that doesn't make my apartment look like an interrogation room. There were message board threads from our town, and the next one over about weird nights at toll plazas, people hearing their own greetings come back a second late, cops saying they walked up on empty cars that felt warm, and a rumor about a kid who left a photo on a counter and never came back from the next exit. Rumors make you feel less special and more terrified at the same time. I closed the laptop and put on a sitcom laugh track and fell asleep with my shoes on. 2 nights ago, just after 2:00, the oldest, slowest sedan I've ever seen in that lane drifted up, stopped perfectly at the line, and shut off. The driver's window didn't go down at first. When it did, the air that came out smelled like wet cardboard in winter. A hand set a photo down with 2 fingers, like gentleness was a technique they'd practiced with fragile things that aren't cups. The photo showed my hallway at home, the dull carpet I hate, and the low ceiling light that makes my skin look wrong. The angle was from my door peephole and a little to the left of it. In the center of the frame, I stood with my keys in my mouth because my hands were holding a bag of groceries, and I was laughing because my neighbor had surprised me by opening his door and scaring me without meaning to. I remember that moment. The door in the photo to my right was open a crack. In reality, I know it was shut. I asked because I had to, "Where did you get this?" The driver's window went up. The engine turned over. He rolled away without ever having paid. I put that one in my glove compartment instead of the drawer because there are things you don't leave at work even if work feels like where they belong. Now I try not to make promises to myself about what I will do if it happens again. It feels like a word that bellies the truth open too easily. I tell myself I'll ask for a transfer again next month, and maybe I will. I tell myself I won't step out onto the catwalk alone again, and I believe that until a cone tips and I need to set it right. I hold the intercom switch in my hand like a person holds a rosary they don't really understand. Most people who pass my booth at night never look up, even at the parts where the glass wants to be a mirror more than a window. Tonight, a little after 2, a car idled in the lane without coming forward, and the glass fogged in a circle like a breath that remembers winter. The drawer tapped my leg, polite as a fingertip asking to pass. I slid it an inch. Inside was a fresh square, face down, with a white border against a black drawer. On the back, someone had scratched tomorrow's date. I flipped it over to get it over with. It was me, leaning toward the window, smiling at a driver whose window never rolls down. I pulled over to answer a call in the only spot with 2 bars and picked the wrong place to learn that the woods can answer back. It was one of those stretches of rural highway where the shoulder isn't really a shoulder, just gravel shoved up against a wall of trees. The dash clock read 1:52 a.m., the kind of time where nothing is supposed to happen except yawning and coffee. I let the engine idle so the heater wouldn't die, watched my breath ghost the glass, and told myself I'd be back on the road in 2 minutes. That was before I heard the first scream. I'm Brian, 31, and I do after-hours at calls for medical offices around my county in Pennsylvania. Most of my driving is on 2-lane blacktop, County Route 14 over the ridge, then a left past a feed mill and into nothing for 20 miles. I keep a paper atlas in the door pocket because some of these roads might as well be guesses. The car is a 2011 Impala that smells like stale coffee and damp carpet if I forget to crack a window. When my phone rings after midnight, it's usually a password reset or a printer jam or someone I didn't want to meet in the daylight. The road where I stopped sits between mile markers 108 and 109, a straight ribbon with a ditch on one side and woods on the other. No houses, no mailbox clusters, no yard lights bleeding through branches, just trees that start 3 feet from the pavement and make their own weather under the canopy. It was early March, cold enough for frost to fuzz the grass, not cold enough for ice to make excuses. My high beams cut out when I pulled over, leaving the shoulder lit by a weak triangle of headlights and the red pulse of my hazard lights reflecting off wet bark. Somewhere far off, a train took a breath and let it out. I was returning a call to a dentist's office whose server had decided it hated Tuesday. While I waited for the night manager to find a password, I killed the radio so I could hear myself think. The gravel crunched when I shifted my weight in the seat, the kind of sound that travels too far when everything else is quiet. I could smell that sweet, damp rot you get near a creek. When the call ended, 5 minutes, maybe less, I set the phone in the cup holder and took a second to rub my eyes. That's when I heard her, a woman yelling help from the trees. It didn't come from the road behind me or the curve ahead. It rose from the black line of trunks to my right like a sound coming up through boards. It wasn't a coyote's pretending to be people thing either. I've heard foxes scream. This was language. Help me. It came again, raw and human and close enough that my whole back tightened like it wanted to stand up without me. I slid the window down 3 inches and the cold bit my teeth. Hello, I said before I could put the thumb back into my mouth. I hate that instinct in myself, but it's there. The air slammed my hello back at me off bark and nothing else. I grabbed the little flashlight from the door pocket and hit the beam into the green black. The light caught wet branches and drops, lit a strip of ditch water, and found nothing taller than saplings. The voice called like I hadn't just asked the world to prove something to me. Logic shows up late, but still shows up. There are bad things that live in woods, sinkholes, downed wires, and men. I locked the doors without thinking, because a locked door feels like a choice, and I tapped 911 with my thumb. The phone found a bar, then 2, then 1 again, like it was choosing a lane. When the operator answered with that clean, unfazed tone they must practice in a classroom, I said my name and where I was, and that a woman was calling for help from the tree line on County 14 near mile 108. The operator asked if I could safely approach, and I said no so fast it sounded like I'd been rehearsing. She told me to stay in the vehicle, keep my hazards on, and if possible, honk my horn in short bursts to let the person know help was en route. She asked for a landmark. I said there wasn't one I trusted. We'll dispatch a unit from the township, she said. ETA 20 minutes. She asked me to keep the line open. The scream came again, help me, like she hadn't heard me talking to someone she couldn't see. The operator said, I hear it, and the way she said it made my eyes water for a second. The loop started slow, help me, then silence, then please, like it learned the second word on a cable TV melodrama. I tried to map the distance with my ear the way you do with thunder. If I had to put it on a diagram, it was 20 yards into the trees and a little to the right, just past where the ditch water doubled itself in the beam. It didn't move closer or farther, it just repeated. Crickets in March don't have much to say, but even the few willing chirps shut up when the voice came, and then came back in exactly the same space like someone hit play. I did what the operator told me because doing keeps panic small. 3 quick horns. The sound bled into the trees and got eaten. Help, the voice said, as if it had to wait for my noise to die before it could speak. I cracked the door because my headlights didn't have the right angle, and I stepped out with the flashlight, staying in my light like a cartoon character afraid of the dark. The gravel was slick with cold wet. My breath came out in little steam clouds that felt too white. Where are you? I called, adding how stiff my voice sounded in the open. The ditch was cut down a foot at the edge and held a skin of scum that shifted when you stepped near it. There was a fallen fence just beyond, old farm wire stapled into a line of long-dead posts, now lying like a skeleton of something no one cared enough to bury. Nobody had walked here recently. The leaves kept their chaos. I found a beer can wedged under a root that had rusted into art, a single glove with no partner, and a gum wrapper shining like a coin. Please. This time it cracked, the way a voice breaks when the throat is done with being human for a while. It occurred to me how dumb it would be to leave my car idling with the door open even 2 steps away. I backed until the dome light found me again and shut myself in. The operator asked if I could see the person. I said no. Can you see any movement? She asked. The voice came again, help me, and my brain noticed a beat I hadn't wanted to clock. The help and the me didn't quite share a breath. It was like the 2 words belonged to different tribes. The dash clock ticked to 2:09 a.m. and then for a half second it didn't advance, like it needed to clear its throat before doing its job. The voice called again. My flashlight beam made a white path and then a white wall. The hazard lights threw a red flicker over bare trunks and frost. I thought about honking again and decided I was done announcing anything. Sir, the operator said, like she didn't want me to fold into the part of the seat where you become furniture. The unit is 8 to 10 minutes out. Do not approach. I told her I wouldn't. I meant it until I heard a new sound under the voice, a faint and small crunch, like someone moving their weight from one foot to the other on lathes. It came between help and me, and it didn't come from the exact same spot the voice did. There's alone, and then there's not. At 2:14 a.m., the voice changed. It wasn't volume or pitch. It learned something. Brian, called clean and wrong like my name was a keyword. I hadn't said my name out loud since the operator answered, and I sure hadn't said it to the trees. My hands forgot to do hands things for a second. The operator said, "Did you just say your name?" I told her no, and I believed myself until my voice showed up again from the tree line, repeating what I'd said to her 1 minute earlier. I'm at mile 108, County 14. A woman is calling for help. Word for word, my mouth went dry and heavy like I'd stuffed cotton between my tongue and teeth. I didn't stay brave. I locked the doors again even though they were locked. I hit the hazard switch like punching it would make a difference. A car crested the rise way down with high beams I wanted to worship, passed without slowing, and gave me one hard flash like a blessing or a warning. For a heartbeat, the tree line lit up like a stage. In that wash, I saw a shape between 2 trunks, just enough human geometry to click my brain into a person. Narrow shoulders, head turned slightly, and hair or a hood that made a darker arc. When the red tail lights burned, the shape went flat again. The operator asked me to describe what I saw. I said someone, which isn't helpful. My hands had started their own little tremor, the kind that you can almost make vanish by controlling your breathing but not completely. I placed the flashlight face down on the seat and let it make a small circle on the headliner because the beam felt like it was making rabbits out of everything. Please, the voice said, and then overlapped with itself. Please, a split-second echo that didn't belong to the air. For another minute or 5, I couldn't tell. I sat there and cataloged minor details because minor details feel like anchors. The glove in the ditch had a frayed edge. The beer can was an old brand with a logo that was discontinued years ago. The rust on the old wire fence made my tongue taste like pennies from just looking at it. The voice called 3 more times. On the last one, it put the wrong stress on me, like a bad actor trying to make a word wear drama. Headlights finally appeared in my mirror and stayed instead of passing. A township SUV eased up behind me, blew bar off but takedown lights making the world look like a medical form. A deputy got out with his jacket zipped to his throat in a posture that said he hated the cold as much as I did. He didn't swagger. He kept his voice low because people with authority at dumb hours learn that shouting makes animals and humans do strange things. He told me to stay in the car. He angled his light into the trees and said, "Ma'am, call out if you can hear me," and that was the smartest sentence I'd heard all night. The voice didn't answer him. Instead, as if it had been waiting for a cue only I could give, it said in my own voice, "I'm not leaving the vehicle," with the exact frustrated breath I'd used 10 minutes earlier. The deputy paused, just a half beat, the way people pause when their script changes. He moved his beam slowly from left to right. He didn't find anything he wanted to show me. He radioed something that sounded like miles and codes back to someone else sitting warm. He could have made me feel small by telling me it was a fox or kids or wind in pipes. He didn't. He just said the line they say because their job is to keep people from sprinting into the worst part of their own night. If you need to, head on. We'll check both sides. He took my plate number and asked me to verify the mile marker and county. I gave it to him, and he wrote it on his hand. If I'd been telling this to a camera, I would have said it was bravery or professionalism that made me put the car in drive. If I'm telling you the truth, it was the voice saying help in my voice again that did it. I pulled out gently, tires popping gravel, and merged back into a road that looked like every other ribbon of two-lane in a county that has too many. The deputy's lights threw shadows across the trunks until a curve took them out of my mirror. At the next turnout, I pulled in again and let my forehead thump the heel of my hand once because I needed to feel something I understood. The woods there were newer, more scrubbed than oak. The air smelled less like cold water and more like damp dirt. Nothing called to me from those trees. I made it home a little after 3. My apartment sits over a hardware store that's been there longer than me, the kind of place that locks up at 6 and leaves its neon open sign unlit like a promise for morning. I threw my jacket on the chair I always throw it on and took my phone into the bathroom because the mirror above the sink is the only mirror that tells the truth about my face. The call log had one entry highlighted that I didn't place, an outgoing call at 2:14 a.m. to my own voicemail. The message lasted 13 seconds. I put the phone on speaker and let it play on the edge of the sink. On the recording, you can hear my hazard relay clicking, my heater fan humming, and my fist tight in my lap. Then you hear my voice say, quiet and as careful as the end of a prayer, I'm at mile 108, County 14. A woman is calling for help. Then you hear me say, almost under it, help me, in a tone I swear never came out of my throat. There's the sound of a footfall on leaves where there wasn't anyone, and then the message ends because that's how long my phone decided it wanted to keep a ghost. I slept for an hour with all the lights on because that felt like something a kid would do, and for one night I let myself be a kid. In the morning, after a coffee that tasted like the inside of the pot, I called the township to ask for the incident number so I could say I'd done the responsible thing. The woman at the desk asked me to hold, then came back with a voice that had lost some of its office layer. She said there was a note on my call. Not a lecture, not a joke, just a sentence, the kind people say when they don't have better ones. We've had that same report, she told me, every night around 2 for the last 10 years. I said nothing dumb like that's impossible. It felt too easy. She added softer that there had been a missing persons report filed a decade ago on that stretch. A woman whose car ran out of gas who called a friend and who then never made it to the friend's driveway. We don't say her name on the phone anymore, the woman said, almost apologetically. People hear it and start hearing other things. I thanked her like people thank when there isn't a thing to thank for. The next day I rerouted my drives because avoiding something is a decision you're allowed to make even if you feel stupid about it. I added 15 minutes and 3 stop signs to keep my tires away from mile 108. I told myself it was superstition and let it be. Then that night at 2:14 a.m., my phone lit my bedroom ceiling with a rectangle of white and buzzed once. A voicemail from an unknown number had arrived. I didn't pick it up. It played itself 2 minutes later because I hadn't untoggled autoplay in years. The recording was wind on leaves and a voice that might have been mine. Help me, it said, not loud. It said my name next, the wrong way, like a mouth testing the shape. Then it said, clear and calm, I'm not leaving the vehicle. That one punched low. I stood in the dark and let the message die like a match. I didn't sleep after that because the room didn't feel like it belonged to me, while the hallway outside mine could have been any hallway in any building where someone whispers names into glass. For a week, nothing else happened. The county roads were just roads you curse when the grader hasn't been by. Printer trays jammed, people thanked me for being awake, and the sun slid in and out of a sky that pretended it didn't know anything. Then on a Sunday, I drove the long way home after dinner at my parents' place because I had a headache and wanted to avoid the highway. I hit a four-way and saw a white-haired man in a flannel jacket stapling a missing cat flyer to a pole. The cat looked annoyed in a way that meant it would come back when it wanted. The man had circled the title with a thick marker and written please in pen under it. I told myself out loud to stop seeing patterns. I don't always listen to myself. 2 nights later, I ended up on County 14 by accident because my brain did what brains do and took the road it's taken 100 times when my mouth was too busy singing along to something on the radio to notice. I didn't realize until the mile marker flashed 107. I could have turned around, but that felt like inviting a thing to admit it was bigger than me. I kept my hands light on the wheel and my eyes on the nearest neon number. The hazard switch under my fingers felt like a tooth I couldn't stop touching. At 2:12 a.m., before I reached 108, something ran across the road. Not a deer, you learn deer movement by heart out here. This was lower, faster, and less graceful. It hit the ditch and didn't thrash the way something alive does when it meets water. It slid like a shadow and then stood up wrong and stepped into the trees. I kept going because stopping had become the most dangerous thing I could imagine doing. The dash clock clicked to 2:14 and stuck there, just long enough for me to think about sending a text to prove I lived by the same rules as everyone else. The phone showed 1 bar, then none. When the woods at mile 108 opened their black seam next to me, I didn't look. Whatever voice lives in a human being that wants to help curled into itself and stayed quiet. I drove. The air inside the car went a degree colder, measurable or not. My hazard switch made a soft noise under my finger without being pressed, like a cat chuffing in the next room. In the dead center of my windshield, in the fog my defroster hadn't cleaned, 4 fingertip ovals appeared, as if someone had reached from the outside and pressed there. They spaced themselves like an adult hand. They vanished when I blinked. I don't tell this to everyone because I know what it sounds like. I keep driving that stretch because the county didn't move the trees to make my life easier, and the offices I fix don't care which road my tires touch so long as their screens turn back on. Sometimes it's just a road. Sometimes at 2:14 a.m. a whisper lives in the scene between my radio and my breath and says my name wrong, then says it right, then says help me in a tired way that makes me feel ashamed if I don't answer. I've learned to put my phone in the glove box and keep my eyes forward and let the call roll to voicemail where it belongs. Last week I opened my glove box to grab the atlas because my phone map died the way it does when a hill decides who owns the air. The Polaroid slid out from the paper and hit my knee and fell face down. My stomach knew it before my hand flipped it. The white border had a smudge in the corner like a thumbprint. The image was of my car in that gravel turnout from 3 feet above my left shoulder, headlights cutting a wedge into wet bark. My head is turned slightly, like I'm listening to a thing I've already heard. In the lower right corner, in pen strokes that could have been mine on a grocery list, someone had written 2:14. I didn't call anyone to tell them what I found. I didn't drive to the station and ask them if they wanted to start a file with my name in it. I slid the photo back into the atlas and shut the glove box. I keep my roots buried now, like switching footsteps might shake something loose. It hasn't. If you ever pull over on a road like mine because your phone finds 2 bars next to a wall of black trees, and you hear a woman ask for help from a place no light can claim, please do what I couldn't decide to do. Drive on. Don't let your name become another word the woods learn to say. And if your phone buzzes at exactly 2:14 a.m. with a voicemail you didn't leave, don't press play while you're still parked at the edge of the trees. I always thought I could pick my car out by touch alone. The shape of the door handle, the weight of the seatbelt, the tiny click my wiper stalk makes when it lands in the perfect spot. The night I learned I was wrong, the pump timer on the screen said $42.13, and my dash clock read 1:56 a.m. I was under those humming LED panels that make everything look a little too clean. It was just me, a sleepy cashier behind bulletproof glass, and a row of empty pumps reflecting orange cones. I told myself I'd be back on the highway in 5 minutes. I'm Samantha, 29, and I do late runs for a wholesale bakery in Tulsa. Most nights I'm ferrying racks and returns between shops, then heading home with a trunk that smells like sugar and yeast. The car is a 2016 silver Camry with a small dent on the rear passenger door and a dangling pine tree air freshener I've meant to throw out for the last 4 months. There's a photo strip of me and my sister tucked in the visor, and a Blue Star Mother's magnet on the fridge at my mom's that somehow turned into me keeping a Blue Star sticker on my back window because she asked me to. Those tiny, dumb details are how I define what's mine. It was late enough that even the highway had stopped pretending it could keep you company. The station sat at the edge of a county road and the on-ramp, one of those in-between places with a dark fast food sign, a car wash bay that looks haunted when the brushes aren't moving. The wind had dropped, so the only sound was the canopy hum and the buzz of a soda machine with a light inside it almost out. A moth kept hitting the glass, frantic and patient at the same time. The cashier was scrolling on his phone, jaw propped on fist, elbow shiny with cleaning spray. I topped off even though I don't like doing that because it feels like tempting fate, and I clicked the nozzle back into the pump cradle. The receipt printer chewed and spit the paper with the little teeth marks across the top. I left the gas cap door open and walked inside for coffee and something salty, because I always grab something salty when I'm tired. The place smelled like hot plastic and fryer oil that knows it's at the end of its shift. I eyed the jerky like I do when I'm pretending it's a choice and grabbed pretzels instead. The kid at the counter didn't make eye contact until the total showed up. I slid a 20 under the slot and he gave me back a handful of wet coins that all looked like they'd been through the same wash. The security monitor above his head showed the forecourt in 4 squares, the entrance, the row of pumps, a lonely ice chest with one handle missing, and the doors. I could see my car in the corner, a silver triangle of roof and windshield under the corner panel. It looked like every silver triangle I've ever seen, which is the point of owning a silver Camry, I guess. I pushed back out into the night and the doors exhaled that tired breath doors have. My car sat at pump 6, the same spot I always take out of habit so I don't have to run the hose in a weird arc. The other silver Camry sat at pump 4, 2 rows over, same year, same shade, same trim, probably the same impulse purchase floor mats from a big box store. I clocked it the way you clock a stranger who could be your cousin in a blurry faux. I didn't think anything of it beyond a quick huh. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, tossed the pretzels onto the passenger seat, and reached for my keys on the console. They weren't there. The charger cord I leave curled like a sleeping snake wasn't there either. The seat felt wrong by an inch, my foot's angle wasn't matched to a familiar brake pedal resistance, and the faint scent in the car wasn't stale pine and coffee, more like coconut, the rental car kind. On my visor, the photo strip with me and my sister was missing. In its place was an identical strip with two girls who weren't us. It took a full beat for my eyes to flick to the windshield and then 2 pumps over to where my car sat with its driver's door closed, and the thing I knew was mine reflecting exactly the things I knew I owned. My phone sat glowing on the passenger seat of that car, a rectangle pulsing with a notification I couldn't read from here. My keys lay next to it, blue lanyard looped once, the way I drop them when my hands are tired. The world had scooted left by 2 pumps while I wasn't looking. I didn't say anything out loud because saying it out loud would make my mouth an accomplice. I pressed the unlock button on the wrong steering wheel out of reflex and nothing chirped in this dead air. The radio display in this car, not my car, came on by itself, soft orange, and said Bluetooth connected, Samantha's iPhone, even though my phone was 2 pumps over. The bass thudded in my chest 3 beats behind my pulse like a nightclub on the other side of a wall. I hit power, it stayed on. My thumb was sweating half-moons into the little knurl of the knob. I forced the handle and the door stuck half a 64th of an inch before giving. The parking lot air slid in and carried that soda machine buzz like it had been invited. I got out careful, like I was leaving a sleeping baby instead of a car that borrowed my name. My own Camry sat exactly where I'd left it, quiet and smug. My phone glowed again and a banner scrolled, new device connected, Camry audio. The timestamp said 2:03. 2 pumps over inside the wrong car I had just climbed out of. The radio changed stations without a hand. Static, then the weather, then a voice that sounded like mine reading the weather from 6 seconds ago. The screen still said Samantha's iPhone. I pressed the fob for my own car like a person who does the right thing too late sometimes. Both cars flashed their hazards once. There's a kind of silence after that kind of thing that makes your own breathing feel like a loud decision. I walked around the back of my car to the passenger side because my phone looked closer, and I didn't want to put my body between 2 of the same things like I was stepping into the middle of a coin toss. The back bumper had a scratch on the left I knew by heart. The wrong car's bumper had the same scratch on the right. My stomach did a slow elevator drop. I unlocked my own door and grabbed my phone and keys like they were a child's hand in a mall. Inside, for real, things were where I left them. My charger cord was a sleeping snake again. The seat held me without that inch of doubt. The air smelled like the stupid pine tree I hadn't thrown out. The console lid creaked the way it creaks. My radio was off. My dash clock flipped to 2:07 quietly, the way it always does, like the numbers are shy. I told myself I'd do the simplest thing, start the engine, pull out slow, and pretend an error like that is just a story you laugh about a week later. The wrong car's radio made a small feedback pop, like a microphone brushing a shirt. Both Camry's hazard lights flashed once without a hand on them. The clerk inside didn't look up. He was watching a video of someone doing something stupid with fireworks on his phone. I pulled my shifter into reverse. This is where I could say I drove off and forgot it, but I didn't. I stared at the wrong car because you don't just leave something with your name attached to it. On its passenger seat lay a bag of pretzels identical to mine, but the bag was ripped in the middle as if someone had opened it wrong in a hurry. The rip was a clean, jagged smile, not how I opened pretzels. A receipt under the bag peeked out. I could see the top line, pump 6. I was at pump 6. I put my own car back in park and cut my engine because the sound of a running engine in a moment like that feels like the world trying to go on without you. I got out again. It felt worse this time, like I was stepping into a weather pattern I had no business stepping into. I gave myself a rule as a way to make it feel less like I was making it up. 3 steps around the wrong car, glance once through the glass, then leave. Rules are how you put a fence around a problem. Through the wrong car's back seat window, I saw a sweater that looked like mine balled up under a rake handle. The sweater had a coffee stain identical to the one I made 2 weeks ago when I tried to drive, and that left turn bounced my tumbler onto the seat. The stain was on the opposite side of the sleeve. On the dash, a parking pass for my complex hung from the mirror, but the building number in tiny print was off by 1. The registration in the glove box stuck up where a lazy hand had shoved it in. Through the plastic, I could make out my name without the H, Samantha, like someone who didn't know me filled it out from memory. The address was right down to the apartment number, then wrong by a digit. The part of me that likes to collect the facts like pennies fought the part of me that likes breathing. I tapped my phone camera against the glass, stupid because glare, but I wanted to capture it, to have proof for the version of me that would wake to sunlight and rationalize. The wrong car's radio changed stations again as if bored. It landed on a true crime show mid-sentence, and the host said a line about 2 identical vehicles circulating the same block. I hit the fob in my fist hard, and both cars' locks clicked, that little percussion section in perfect sync. My body had had enough. I moved toward the station doors again because zippers and fluorescent light make me feel like I'm not alone. The cashier looked up, and I guess my face said more than my mouth would have. He pushed the PA button to talk through the speaker. "Lose something?" he said, not mocking, not helpful. I said I got into the wrong car by mistake. He squinted toward the pumps like he'd stretch his eyes to see details if he could. "That's the year everyone bought," he said, and pointed at a smudge on the screen instead of at the world. He thumbed the camera back to the last minute because he had that power and that habit both. I watched myself leave the store and get into a silver Camry at pump 6. Then I watched myself leave the store and get into a silver Camry at pump 4. We overlapped for 3 seconds in 2 small squares, 2 similar me's opening 2 similar doors like that's how limbs work in some other version of the rulebook. The camera timestamp said 2:09 in both squares. The seconds weren't the same. The cashier's mouth hung open a fraction until he remembered to close it. He didn't say, "That's wild," because that would have been honest. He said, "Glitchy feed," because that lets a mind go back to scrolling. He hit a button and printed a copy of my receipt because he thought maybe paper helps. The top read pump 6 at 156, my card digits hidden by asterisks. Another receipt printer on the counter hissed in sympathy and printed itself a slip no one had asked for. It read pump 4 at 156 and used the same 4 masked digits as mine. I went back out because a human voice hadn't fixed anything, and the cooler air didn't care if I understood it or not. Both Camrys idled quietly now, which wasn't how I'd left them. The wrong car's air vents breathed like a sleeping thing. On its infotainment screen, a navigation pop-up you get when you yank the cord out of a phone flashed and disappeared. The destination line said home and had my address, the wrong digit and all. My own car's screen read, "No device connected," like it had decided to paint the world in simple absolutes just for a minute. At 2:14 a.m., a sheriff's Tahoe rolled by on the road. No lights, no urgency, just a man with a uniform proving the world was shared by other humans. The wrong car's dome light came on without a door opening. The shape in the passenger seat resolved itself in that interior glow. A brown paper bag with Samantha K in black marker and a heart, like someone with a name tag had made it to go order for me. I hadn't ordered anything. The heart was not how anyone at the station writes. I got in my car and hit lock and put my hands at 10 and 2 the way you do when you're pretending you still care about small rules. I pulled out slowly. In my mirror, the wrong car idled like it was waiting for an argument to rotate in its favor. The station's lonely ice chest stared at both of us without really watching. The moth hit the glass again, patient. The road up to the on-ramp felt like thin ice. On the highway, the Camry drove like a Camry, and I let that be a kindness. My phone buzzed in the cup holder like it had learned Morse code. 3 vibrations, pause, 2 vibrations. I looked at the lock screen at the next red light because the timing had to be noted somewhere or I was going to discard it completely. A new message from an unknown number said, "You forgot something." No link, no photo. The contact bubble was just a gray circle. I didn't go straight home. I drove a few blocks past my complex and came around the back way, the route with speed bumps and a couple of bad potholes like the parking lot trying to keep you honest. My spot is under the burned-out section of the light, 2 spaces from the dumpster. The neighbor with the Jeep always parks crooked into his line. I pulled into my slot and sat with the engine cut for a full minute, because I'm the kind of person who needs to let my body catch up with what my eyes are going to decide to do next. The parking lot looked normal in that specific nighttime apartment way. 1 light working too hard, 2 out. A pair of raccoons practicing breaking into something they don't need. The distant sound of someone's TV doing that low laugh track you hear even through walls. I hit the lock button on my fob, listened for the chirp, and heard a second chirp from the street. Then a third. I thought it was an echo at first, the way sound bounces in concrete courtyards like it's playing tag with itself. The third chirp had a different pitch. I walked the short hall to my unit, and the light by my door came on with that lazy warm-up long-tube bulbs do. The mat said hello in a font that might as well say don't. Inside, I put the pretzels on the counter and my keys next to them and my phone on top of my keys, like a stack of totems to remind myself I had their answers. The message from the unknown number sat on the lock screen like a dare. I didn't reply. I washed my hands because it's a thing you can do that makes the brain feel like it's changed something. I slept with the TV on a show where everyone talks about houses they'll never live in. I woke up at 9:03 because my phone buzzed with a traffic alert on a route I wasn't taking. The notification below it said, "Camry audio connected at 2:14 a.m. I hadn't been in my car at 2:14 a.m. then. I was on the highway at that minute, counting green signs and bargaining with myself. The car app I never use had a fresh line. The driver door was locked at 2:16. Passenger door unlocked at 2:16:02 a.m. I spent my morning doing chores I didn't need to do, the kind you do to keep your hands away from doors and steering wheels. I called my mother and talked about her oven like it could make any of this make sense. I went out at noon. The sun made everything look like an accusation. On my windshield under the wiper blade, tucked so neatly it looked like a coupon, was a receipt from the gas station. It said pump 4. The time was 2:01 a.m. The last 4 of the card matched mine. The signature line had my name and the M had an extra mountain. I told myself I would drive to a different station next time, a different highway, a different brand. I told myself I'd throw away the pine tree and get a different scent so my car would smell like a car that couldn't be wrong. I told myself a lot of things that afternoon. They felt like stickers I was putting on a box that was already sealed. The next night, because the route is the route and the hours are the hours, I was on that same stretch at a similar time. I passed the station with my eyes stubbornly forward. The canopy hummed for someone else. An older Camry pulled in as I passed, different year, different dent, no ghost of my name attached to it. I breathed for the first time like a person who had quit a bad habit. My dash clock clicked to 1:58. A mile later, when I checked my mirror, a silver Camry tucked in 2 cars back took my exit. Could have been anyone, could have been math. I slept fine 2 nights in a row and let that feel like a win. Then on the 3rd, I came home at 2:30 and parked under the dead light, and before I killed my engine, I hit the fob to lock out of habit. 1 chirp from my car, 1 from the street, and a 3rd that sounded like it came from above, echo on concrete. I got out, and the air felt normal, unimportant. The neighbor's porch light clicked on like it was overdue. I told myself I wasn't going to be the person who peers at street shadows, looking for a car that matches her car. Last week I picked up my mail and found one of those plain white envelopes that looks like a bill from a company you've never heard of. Inside was a photo printed on cheap cardstock. It was the gas station forecourt under the canopy, 2 pumps lit, 1 dark, 2 silver Camrys were in the frame. One had a woman at the driver's door holding a bag of pretzels at an angle that made a clean, jagged smile in the cellophane. In the very bottom corner, in a little font the printer had to fight to print, someone had written 2:14 a.m. and nothing else. I didn't bring the photo to the station, and I didn't bring it to the police. I put it in the bottom drawer of my nightstand under a tangle of old cords and a book of stamps because that felt like domesticating it, a way to tame a wild-edged thing. It didn't change anything. 2 days later, my car chirped 1 long and 2 short in the parking lot when I wasn't touching the fob. A message I didn't answer said, "You forgot something," from the same number. The lock on my phone shows the number without a name. The phone wants me to create new contact. I don't. I still drive the Camry to the bakery and back because my rent doesn't care what I believe. I stop at different stations, different corners, and different brands that all sell the same coffee and the same pretzels. Sometimes the Bluetooth connects a beat too fast and says my name out loud in a voice that doesn't belong to anyone. Sometimes I hit lock and hear that second chirp from the street and tell myself someone else owns a Camry and a fob and a life that bumps up against mine if the week tilts just so. I'm not trying to scare you about a car you could buy on any used lot. I'm telling you that on nights when the canopy hums loud and the pump clicks and the receipt shows the wrong pump number, you should double check your door handle the way it sits in your palm. Check the photo in your visor, check where your phone glows when you're not looking. And if you press your fob at 2:14 a.m. and something chirps back from a car that isn't yours, don't turn to see which one answered. I locked mine and walked without looking. I don't want to know which car beeped last. I always thought the shoulder of a highway was the safest kind of nowhere, bright enough to be seen, wide enough to feel separate from whatever's waiting in the trees. The night I learned different, it was just before 2 a.m., and a man was waving up at me from the ditch like the world had forgotten him there. My headlights washed his face into flat color and shadow, and I remember thinking 2 dumb words, "Stay put." I put my hazards on and pulled to a stop the way they tell you in driver's ed, nose angled from the lane, tires on gravel. The only thing that didn't follow the rules was him. I'm Eric, 34, based in Ohio, with the kind of job that makes you a night person without asking. The IT field calls for clinics that don't shut down just because the sun did. My routes are a map of county names instead of destinations. Lucas, Wood, Hancock, then back. I drive an older Forester with a rattly heat shield and a dash cam my sister bought after a near miss last winter. My console holds a clipboard, a roll of orange flagging tape, a cheap headlamp, and enough receipts to prove I live mostly on diner coffee. I'm careful by habit. I signal even when there's no one to signal to. It was late October, cold enough to make your breath look like you're lying, not cold enough for the salt trucks to come out. This stretch was us 6 west of Bowling Green, with farm fields on both sides and a drainage ditch just beyond the rumble strip that carries water like a tired vein after rain. Mile marker 212 slid past, and in the edge of my lights I saw the reflection that made me lift off the gas, a strip of visibility tape moving in an uneven rhythm. The figure attached to the tape resolved into a man below me in the ditch, one hand high, one braced on the incline, palm flashing in little urgent bursts. He didn't step up. He didn't move from that shallow cut of ground like the earth had him by the ankle. He wasn't dressed for being outside. That's what hit me. No coat, just a dark hoodie, jeans with a wet line up the shins, and shoes the wrong color for work boots. The reflective tape was a scrap stuck to one sleeve, torn in a V like it had been peeled from a cone. He was wet to the chest from ditch water that barely reached my shin last time I stepped in it to fix a fallen adopt a highway sign. His face should have been a face, but the angle and the glare made it a grayscale shape with eyes where eyes go. He didn't look drunk. He looked like a person in a bad spot who'd been waiting too long. I rolled to a stop 50 feet ahead because pulling even with him felt like inviting something into the car, and reversed, hazards ticking loud in the quiet. My headlights found him again and held him. He lifted his arm higher and made a bigger arc like he could reach the beam itself. I cracked my window an inch. The cold slid in and brought the ditch smell with it. Cold water, rotted stalks, and that iron note you get near culverts. Hang on, I said automatically, a dumb little promise. My phone was already in my hand. When 911 picked up, the operator's voice had that fluorescent-lit patience that makes you believe in rules. I gave my mile marker and told her a man was waving from the ditch, responsive, with an unknown injury, and that I didn't feel safe going down to him alone in the dark. She told me to stay in my vehicle with the doors locked and keep my lights on him if I could. Help is on the way, she said, a standard line, but it landed like something strong. Estimated time, 12 minutes. I repeated it so my brain could store the number somewhere solid. Up close he kept looking not quite at me, but into the lights like a person too long in a dark room. He didn't yell, that's what bothered me next. People yell when they're in trouble. He showed me his palm, fingers splayed, then put his arm down, then lifted it again. Same cadence, same range. He didn't slip in the mud, didn't shift his feet. A moth banged the glass near my face and made me jump, and when I looked back, he still hadn't moved an inch from that spot. The operator asked if I could see blood. I said no. She asked if he was alone. I almost said yes, and then my mouth changed it to I think so. Another car passed in the opposite lane, a white semi with a blue logo, tires hissing on the shallow damp from yesterday. Its wash of air tugged at me and at the grasses along the ditch. The waving didn't change. It was as if the wind had missed him. I flashed my brights twice because that felt like communication. He paused at the first flash like the light had wait, then resumed like he'd been plugged back in. We see this sometimes, the operator said softly after a beat, then stopped herself. She corrected it to please remain in your vehicle. At 2:07 a.m., I switched off my radio because even low volume felt disrespectful. The dashcam's red dot blinked steadily. I watched the condensation from his breath, or what I told myself was breath, rise in little ghosts that didn't quite match the warmth in the air. He lifted his arm again, same arc, same angle. A small cross leaned near the culvert 20 feet up the ditch I hadn't noticed in the dark. White wood with weathered edges, plastic flowers bleached to almost nothing. That put a heaviness in my throat I didn't expect. Memory, 3 winters ago, a story about a hit and run near this mile marker. Memory, telling myself I didn't have time to click anything while the gas pump ran. He lowered his arm, and for the first time his head tilted enough that the brim of his hood lost the shadow line. His mouth moved. It moved out of time with the arm. The words didn't make it to me, or they did and fell apart before they turned into sound. The operator said, "Sir," through her headset like she needed me to make noises that meant alive. "I'm here," I said. The night said nothing back except the tick of my hazards and the squeak I've been meaning to fix in my right wiper. I told him again, "Hang on," and he nodded the slow nod you give a person who's repeating themselves on purpose. At 2:11, a set of headlights rose far behind me and held steady. Township deputy. Relief made my fingers tingle. The waving didn't change. For a second I imagined he'd sink back or vanish like a bad TV trick because an authority would make the trick embarrassed to continue. He didn't. The tan SUV eased onto the shoulder behind me, lights off but takedowns spilling white on gravel, and a man in a dark jacket stepped out with a beam that cut a clean path. He approached low along the guardrail like it could jump. When he reached my passenger window, I lowered it 2 inches. "Stay put," he said in that quiet way people have to use at 2 in the morning. "Point me." I pointed with my chin because my hands had become part of the wheel. "There," I said. His light went where my eyes went. It painted the ditch with clear edges, wet grass, a jag of stone, and the culvert mouth like an O empty. His beam kept moving slowly, nothing. He looked back at me once like maybe I was pointing the wrong way on purpose. "Where?" he asked, not unkindly. I swallowed something that tasted like metal. "He's right there," I said, a little too sharp, and for the first time since I stopped, I let go of the wheel long enough to point with a real finger. In the wash of my own headlights, he was still there, hood, jeans, tape. He lifted his arm, same arc for me. The deputy's light never touched him. It seemed to cut right through his outline and put a clean white on the bank behind. The deputy stepped cautiously into the ditch and sank an inch. His boot left a print I could see from my driver's seat. 10 feet from where the man was waving, he paused and swung the light back. Then he turned and came back to my window like someone who had just failed at explaining a magic trick to a child. "I'm not seeing anyone," he said, professional, not condescending. "We'll get fire out to run the ditch just in case. Stay in the vehicle." He leaned down the line toward his radio, lips moving, codes happening. I looked back, and the man in my headlights had turned his face toward my car window, not the deputy, not the light, but me. He lifted his other hand, palm up like asking for change, then pressed it outward. It was the only time the motion wasn't a wave, it was a push. The cold that came through my cracked window felt like the open door of a freezer. The operator in my ear asked, "What's happening now?" I said he, and stopped because the word didn't fit anything I trusted. The deputy's flashlight traced the slope again. His beam leapt over the culvert and caught the white cross, lingered, then moved on. My brights went dull for a heartbeat and then flared like the battery had hiccuped. The man in the ditch lifted his arms together as if he were grabbing something I couldn't see. For half a second, my mind decided he was holding a steering wheel. At 2:14 a.m., my passenger door lock clicked once, a small sound that somehow filled the car. I didn't touch it. I thumbed the lock button before the click finished and heard the relay answer. Outside, the deputy called into the dark, "Sir, call out if you can hear me." And that was the worst sentence because it gave the night a chance to be polite and refuse. Something shifted in the grass near my rear tire, small, like a field mouse. I jumped, and my knee hit the key fob in the ignition ring. My hazard tick stuttered and resumed, offbeat for 3 pulses before lining up again. 2 engines announced themselves together. A fire engine from the township's small volunteer house slowed on the shoulder, then parked behind the deputy with just enough space for both of them to pretend they'd planned it. Flashers strobed against my rear view in that red-blue pattern that makes the world take stock. A firefighter in turnout pants hopped down and moved to the ditch with a handline and a casual competence that told me he'd climbed into worse water than this 100 times. He walked the slope, light combing. He pushed aside grass with the toe of his boot. He looked where I was looking and saw nothing that would satisfy any of us. "They found tracks," that's what the deputy told me after the first sweep. Tire tracks at the edge of the shoulder leading into the ditch, shallow and recent looking. He showed me with his light, parallel darks where rubber had pressed wet gravel, the imprint of my tread pattern like a fingerprint. "Yours," he said. I felt my face burn even though I hadn't accused him of anything. "We'll keep looking," he added. He wasn't scolding, he was marking a fact. "We get calls here now and then," he said too lightly, like the words needed to be said but not held. "Don't get out of the car." The firefighter cleared the culvert with a hook because maybe a branch or a bag was snagged because maybe something. The hook came up with weeds, old plastic, and a rusted beer can I could have dated by the logo. No clothes surfaced, no wallet, nothing to make a report ugly. When the deputy came back to my window one more time, his expression had moved from brisk to something that lives under brisk. "Do you want a report number?" he asked. He wrote it on a card with a pen that had to be shaken first. His other hand was on the roof of my car, palm flat, as if to prove the vehicle belonged to the same physics as his body. I drove when he told me I could go. That's the part I don't love admitting. I was relieved to be given permission to leave a problem that still had its palm up in my lights. The ditch was just ditch water again in my mirror, and the man, if I say he was a man I'm asking you to choose with me, was either behind me or never there. My hands hurt from squeezing the wheel, and my shoulders did that thing where the muscles raise themselves up like they can turn into armor and then forget how to lower. The operator thanked me for calling, like she hadn't heard the part my door lock played. At home at 3:02, I put the dashcam card into my laptop like a person putting a letter opener into an envelope, too careful, as if it could cut. The footage was steady, the sound a reliable hum of engine and heater. The ditch in my lights was grass and water, and the culvert's black circle, where the man had been, was empty. But the audio picked up something soft at 2:14, something my ear wanted to call a voice pressed up against glass from a foot away, a voice you can't make out but your brain fills with meaning. I replayed it 3 times and convinced myself the difference between heater noise and please is a matter of faith. The next afternoon I drove back in daylight because that's how you domesticate a memory. You put the sun on it. The ditch looked smaller. The slope looked like a gentle invitation, not a trap. The little white cross I'd seen was older than one winter. The flowers at its base were brittle and had that sun-bleached, anonymous kind of grief on them. A second cross a few yards farther down had dates I didn't want to read. The culvert mouth smelled like it always smells, wet dirt and iron. I stood by my own tread marks on the shoulder and felt the dumb embarrassment of seeing them attached to a story that didn't get solved. The township posted a short note on their Facebook page that night. Units responded to a welfare check on us 6, nothing found. That's the entire fiction of most nights. Nothing found, I didn't comment, I didn't tag. I told myself if someone needed help, I had tried, and I told myself if no one was there, I had wasted professional time. Both sentences felt wrong in my mouth. I kept my phone plugged in and my Radio Shack scanner app open all week like a person looking for a song by scanning stations too fast. 3 nights later, coming back from a call that took longer than it should have, I crested that same low grade and told myself I wouldn't look. My eyes did what eyes do. The ditch in the sweep of my beams looked like every ditch. I reached for the radio to find some talk I didn't care about. The dash clock turned from 2:13 to 2:14 and paused a breath. That breath was nothing until it was. A shape moved in my periphery, and my headlights found him exactly where I had left him in my head. Same spot, same hand. The same piece of reflective tape is catching the beam. I didn't stop. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 because laws are one of the few spells that still work at that hour. My phone lit my cup holder with a banner. New voicemail, no missed call. I let it sit until the mile marker had 3 more numbers in it than I wanted. When I played it in my driveway, sitting in a car that finally felt like mine again, the message was 13 seconds. It started with the heater hum, then the tiny tick of a relay, then my own voice saying, "Hang on, help is on the way," except I hadn't left a message like that for anyone. Under it, a second voice, low like a person speaking from the wrong side of a wall, "Don't leave me in the lights." Before I could decide what that meant, the message ended. I printed the report number the deputy gave me and put it with the other papers in my glove box. I threw in a cheap thermal blanket I'll never hand to anyone because they won't need warmth I can provide. I added a warning triangle because it made me feel less like a passenger in nights I already owned. I started using different routes after midnight because pretending to have a choice is the only way to feel like you do. I still passed mile 212 twice that week by accident because your brain takes you where your hands have built muscle memory. I could end this by telling you I stopped getting voicemails or that the next time I drove past the ditch, it was empty of both water and memory. That would be a cleaner thing to put into your night if you're listening to this in bed with your own blinds pulled down. But last Friday, I pulled into a gas station on my way home for bad coffee and worse pretzels, and under the fluorescent hum, it looked like any stage where nothing supernatural has ever happened. When I came back out, a smear of wet had dried on my hood in the shape of a hand pressed there and slid. Grass seeds stuck where the palm would have been, the kind that only grow in ditches. I wiped it off because leaving it would make me a person who tells himself stories about stains. On the way back, I didn't mean to, but I checked the passenger lock by pressing it down with my thumb and letting it pop back up, proof that plastic still makes the crisp sound plastic makes. At 2:14, without me touching it, it clicked one soft time, like a polite person getting into a car that isn't meant for them, and in my headlights 100 yards ahead, the ditch lifted a hand in the rhythm I already knew by heart. I didn't stop again. I don't anymore. But every time I pass that mile and my lights find that cut of ground, I feel the weight of eyes at window height, waiting to see if I'll put the car in park and leave them in the light.